The opening reflections of this journey invite a deep contemplation of the profound connection between a nation's wealth and the personal financial triumphs of the individuals within it. It is essential to pause and consider how your own economic well-being directly influences the broader financial landscape of your country. Furthermore, this raises a vital question of duty, whether securing personal prosperity is not merely an individual right, but a profound obligation that ultimately contributes to the uplifting and betterment of society as a whole. Reflecting upon this insight can deeply shift one's sense of responsibility in the pursuit of desired wealth. The assertion is made that proper preparation serves as the master key unlocking the doors to success. It is crucial to examine your own readiness to embark upon a transformative journey toward financial mastery. Taking stock of the preparations made thus far is a necessary step before moving forward. A practical and unvarnished assessment of one's current financial reality is required. This involves conducting a thorough and honest inventory of all existing finances. One must carefully gather a comprehensive accounting of all assets, ranging from retirement reserves and real estate to valuable collectibles. Equally important is an unflinching examination of all liabilities, creating a complete ledger of debts, outstanding credit obligations, and taxes owed. As this experience is fundamentally a tool for building financial understanding, it asks the traveler to gauge their current level of comprehension. Measuring this awareness on a spectrum from having very little knowledge to possessing a great deal of mastery helps set the baseline for the education to come. The wisdom contained within these upcoming lessons is specifically designed to aid the seeker in three distinct areas: the initial acquisition of wealth, the discipline required to retain that wealth, and the strategic deployment of surplus funds to generate even greater riches. To truly elevate one's current financial condition, it is imperative to become intimately aware of both personal strengths and vulnerabilities. An honest self-evaluation in each of these three domains, how effectively one acquires money, how securely one keeps it, and how successfully one earns more on existing funds, reveals the areas demanding the greatest focus and improvement. Finally, the foundation of this knowledge rests upon the rich history of Babylon, historically recognized as the most opulent city of the ancient world. The student of wealth is invited to reflect upon their own familiarity with this legendary empire, considering what existing knowledge or preconceptions they might bring to the tales that are about to unfold. An historical sketch of Babylon. No city in the annals of time holds a more glamorous legacy than Babylon. The mere mention of its name evokes images of unimaginable splendor and fabulous troves of gold and precious jewels. One might naturally assume such a magnificent metropolis was situated in a lush tropical paradise blessed with vast forests, abundant mines, and rich natural resources. Yet the reality was starkly different. The city was positioned in a barren, sun-scorched valley alongside the Euphrates River. It lacked trees, stones for construction, and was not even situated along the natural pathways of commerce. The rainfall was entirely inadequate for agriculture. Instead, Babylon stands as a supreme testament to human ingenuity and the capacity to achieve monumental goals using only the tools at hand. Every ounce of wealth and every resource that sustained this great city was entirely forged by the hands of its people. They had only two natural gifts: the fertile dirt beneath their feet and the waters of the river. In a display of engineering brilliance unmatched in their era, the Babylonians constructed massive dams and sprawling irrigation networks to divert the Euphrates. These grand canals channeled life-giving water across the dry terrain, awakening the fertile soil and yielding harvests of wheat and barley unlike anything the world had ever witnessed. Throughout its extensive history, the empire was fortunate to be governed by a lineage of kings who prized justice, wisdom, and enterprise over the vain glory of conquest. While they engaged in conflicts, these were primarily defensive maneuvers against foreign warlords who lusted after Babylon's immense treasuries. The city never birthed egotistical tyrants bent on subjugating the known world. Today, the physical city of Babylon is no more. Located in Asia, roughly 600 miles east of the Suez Canal, it shares a sweltering, arid climate similar to Yuma, Arizona. When the human energy that built and sustained it vanished, the magnificent structures crumbled, returning the valley to a desolate wasteland swept by desert winds, inhabited only by wandering nomadic herders. For centuries, the massive earthen mounds dotting this landscape were ignored by travelers. It was not until archaeologists noticed fragments of brick and pottery exposed by rainfall that excavations began, revealing these hills to be the graves of ancient cities. Uncovering Babylon meant stripping away the accumulated desert dust of 20 centuries from its ruined palaces and temples. Historians and scientists consider the civilization born in this valley to be the oldest definitively recorded, with verified dates stretching back 8 millennia. Astronomers confirmed this timeline by calculating the occurrence of a solar eclipse meticulously described in the Babylonian ruins. These ancient Sumerites were not primitive wanderers, they were highly educated pioneers. They were the original engineers, the first mathematicians, the foremost astronomers, and the founding fathers of high finance, possessing the first known written language. Beyond their colossal irrigation networks, some large enough to fit a dozen horses abreast, they also successfully drained immense marshlands where the Tigris and Euphrates met, transforming swamps into productive farmland. The Greek historian Herodotus visited Babylon during its zenith, leaving behind the only external account of its vibrant society and incredible agricultural bounty. While the towering brick walls have returned to dust, the profound wisdom of Babylon survives. This preservation is owed to their unique method of record-keeping. Lacking paper, they painstakingly etched their writings into moist clay tablets, which were then baked into durable tiles. These tablets, generally 6 by 8 inches thick, functioned much like modern documents, capturing everything from royal edicts, poetry, and laws to promissory notes, property deeds, and mundane storekeeper receipts. Archaeologists have unearthed hundreds of thousands of these resilient artifacts, providing a deeply intimate view into the lives of these ancient people. Among the city's most legendary features were its impenetrable walls, ranked alongside the Egyptian pyramids as a wonder of the ancient world. Queen Semiramis is believed to have constructed the first defensive perimeter, estimated to be 50 to 60 feet tall, reinforced with burnt brick and a deep water moat. Centuries later, King Nabopolassar and his son Nebuchadnezzar erected the later, more famous walls, staggering structures reaching approximately 160 feet in height and spanning between 9 and 11 miles. These ramparts were so broad that a chariot pulled by 6 horses could easily race along the top. Despite facing the mightiest armies of the age, equipped with tens of thousands of horsemen and foot soldiers, Babylon's walls never fell to a siege. The city operated much like a contemporary metropolis, bustling with streets, merchant shops, residential zones, and grand temples where priests officiated. It housed skilled artisans who crafted exquisite jewelry, wove fine textiles, and forged advanced metal weapons, while much of the world still relied on stone and flint. Crucially, they were brilliant financiers, credited with inventing money as a medium of exchange alongside the creation of written titles and promissory notes. Babylon's ultimate fall came not from a breached wall, but from a fatal miscalculation. Around 540 years before Christ, the conqueror Cyrus marched on the city. King Nabonidus, swayed by poor counsel, marched his army out to meet the invaders on the open field. Following their defeat, the Babylonian forces fled, allowing Cyrus to simply walk through the undefended open gates. From that moment, the city's grandeur slowly faded until it was entirely consumed by the desert. Yet, the financial philosophies of Babylon endure eternally. Money remains the universal metric of earthly achievement, unlocking the finest experiences the world can offer. Abundance flows freely to those who grasp the straightforward rules of acquiring it. The very same laws of wealth that governed the bustling streets of Babylon 6 millennia ago dictate the flow of prosperity today. One might naturally expect the wealthiest city of the ancient world to have been situated in a lush and bountiful geographic location. Yet Babylon was built in a flat, arid valley entirely lacking the rainfall necessary to grow crops. This geographic reality serves as a powerful parallel message, prompting a deep reflection on what is truly required to raise your own income level. Every resource that sustained Babylon was entirely man-made, making the city a supreme example of humanity's ability to achieve magnificent objectives using whatever means are currently at hand. You must assess the means currently at your own disposal, taking a thorough inventory of all your talents, skills, professional connections, and any other resources that can be tapped to achieve your financial goals. The Babylonians possessed only 2 natural assets, fertile soil and river water, yet through extraordinary engineering they constructed one of the first successful irrigation systems known to mankind. This historical triumph asks you to look inward and identify the talents or skills you possess that have yet to be fully developed, as well as the new areas of study or practice you deeply wish to pursue. The rulers of Babylon were celebrated not for an endless desire to conquer and plunder other civilizations, but for their profound wisdom, enterprise, and justice. Translating this history to your own life requires examining how such a noble mindset is reflected in your personal journey toward acquiring abundance. These leaders were not interested in paying homage to their own egotism. It is essential to deeply question how many of your own desires for wealth are led by egotistic urges, and to honestly evaluate whether your ego is actively obstructing the acquisition of true wealth in your life. Inhabiting the earth 8,000 years ago, the Babylonians were true pioneers in the fields of engineering, astronomy, mathematics, finance, and the written word. Contemplate the specific character traits required to embody this pioneering spirit, and recognize whether you currently possess these traits or have ever acted as a pioneer in your own experiences. If you have not, consider whether you would like to become one, because they were believed to be the original inventors of money, promissory notes, and written property titles. You're invited to examine how you are most inventive in your own life and what outstanding areas of expertise you hold. Furthermore, despite numerous armies attempting to besiege the city, Babylon's advanced systems and massive walls remained impenetrable. Paralleling this to your own wealth-building journey, you must define the deliberate steps required to make your own mission completely unshakable. The ultimate fall of Babylon occurred only after its protectors abandoned the security of their surrounding walls, opening the gates and allowing enemies to enter and take possession without resistance. This history serves as a stark warning. You must identify the moments in your life when you have been overtaken by internal enemies, such as fear, greed, insecurity, or a consciousness of lack, due to a careless absence of protection. You are challenged to construct your own impenetrable walls to build a secure fortress of wealth. Ultimately, you must internalize the profound truths that money is the medium by which earthly success is measured, and that it makes the enjoyment of the earth's finest offerings possible. Wealth is plentiful for those who understand the simple, enduring laws that govern its acquisition. The exact same laws that controlled money when prosperous men thronged the streets of Babylon 6,000 years ago. By embracing the belief that money is plentiful for those who understand these laws, you can vividly describe, in the present tense and in the greatest possible detail, the magnificent lifestyle you will lead once you have easily acquired the wealth you desire. The opening of this narrative presents a stark image of Bansir, a man consumed by discouragement and struggling to provide basic sustenance for his family. This scenario invites a deeply personal reflection on your own circumstances. It is necessary to examine how this craftsman's predicament might mirror your own experiences. You must consider whether you are currently trapped in feelings of despondency and financial limitation, and clearly articulate the nature of that lack. Bansir confided in his companion Kobi about a magnificent dream of limitless wealth. However, the moment he awoke to his impoverished reality, a powerful surge of rebellion and frustration overtook him. This psychological reaction prompts an inquiry into your own emotional landscape. You must reflect upon whether you have ever experienced a similar rebellion or deep-seated anger upon realizing that your most profound desires have not yet materialized. Conversely, if anger is absent, you must carefully define the exact emotions that arise when you intensely focus on the gap between your aspirations and your reality. A critical point of philosophical tension emerges when Bansir, knowing he is willing to toil endlessly, demands to know why he and his friend are denied a fair share of life's bounties. He questions the fundamental justice of their situation. This requires you to look inward and ask if you have ever felt that life's economic distributions are inherently unjust, that your grueling efforts are continually met with inadequate compensation. You are asked to detail these feelings of inequity, or, if you feel justly compensated, to explore the satisfaction that comes from being fairly rewarded for your labor. The discussion then turns to Arkad, recognized as the wealthiest individual in all of Babylon. A defining characteristic noted by Kobi is that Arkad does not treat those with less fortune with disdain. Instead, he openly acknowledges the crowds, offering smiles and friendly greetings. This observation demands a contemplation of character. You must weigh whether this specific trait of humility and egalitarian respect is actually one of the hidden, foundational secrets to acquiring and maintaining immense prosperity. When Bansir proposes the bold idea of directly asking Arkad for his financial wisdom, Kobi experiences a profound revelation. The fundamental reason they have never possessed wealth is simply that they never consciously made it their objective. They had poured all their energy and focus into mastering their respective crafts, building the finest chariots and playing the sweetest music, and they had achieved exactly what they aimed for. This realization necessitates a parallel examination of your own life. You must construct a comprehensive mental ledger of the specific skills, professions, or passions into which you have poured your ultimate focus and successfully mastered. perhaps at the expense of focusing on wealth itself. Finally, the narrative highlights Bansir's immediate instinct to include their struggling childhood peers in this quest for Arkad's knowledge. Cobby rightly identifies this inherent thoughtfulness as the reason Bansir is so universally loved. This serves as a mirror for your own interpersonal conduct. You are challenged to assess your own level of thoughtfulness and consideration for others. You must actively recall and list the specific actions you take and the words you speak that genuinely place the interests and well-being of your friends and community at the forefront of your intentions. In the ancient, sprawling metropolis of Babylon, there resided a figure of legendary prosperity named Arkad. His vast wealth was spoken of in every corner of the empire, yet he was equally celebrated for his boundless generosity. He gave freely to charitable causes, provided lavishly for his own family, and sustained a lifestyle of undeniable luxury. Remarkably, despite the continuous, heavy outflow of his riches, his fortune compounded at a rate that vastly outpaced his expenditures. Eventually, a group of his oldest companions from his youth approached him, burdened by the heavy weight of comparison. They pointed out the stark contrast in their lives. Arkad was revered as the wealthiest citizen in the empire, dining on rare delicacies and clothed in the finest imported silks, while they were relegated to a relentless struggle merely to keep their families presentable and adequately fed. They reminded him that they had shared the exact same beginnings. They had learned from the same tutors, engaged in the same childhood games, and in those early days, Arkad had demonstrated no superior intellect or extraordinary talent. Furthermore, they had all lived as honorable, hard-working men. Thus, they demanded to know why a capricious universe would arbitrarily shower Arkad with the finest bounties of existence while entirely ignoring their equally deserving efforts. Arkad met their frustration with a gentle but firm correction. He explained that if they had labored for decades with nothing more to show than a meager existence, it was not the fault of an arbitrary universe. Rather, it was a fundamental failure to grasp or to rigorously apply the immutable laws that dictate the accumulation of wealth. He warned them against the seductive illusion of fickle fate. This treacherous concept, he argued, brings no lasting fortune. In truth, sudden unearned wealth acts as a curse, transforming individuals into reckless spenders who rapidly drain their windfalls, leaving them plagued by newly cultivated appetites they lack the ability to gratify. Others, terrified of losing their unearned gold and knowing they lack the skill to replace it, devolve into miserable misers, living in paranoid poverty despite their hidden hoards, terrified of robbers and doomed to secret misery. Arkad challenged his friends to look at the men who had inherited sudden fortunes. They solemnly agreed that such wealth rarely brought lasting peace or competence. Seeking the true path, they begged Arkad to reveal the source of his prosperity. He obliged, taking them back to the mindset of his youth. As a young man, Arkad had keenly observed the world and recognized that wealth acted as a potent amplifier for all the experiences that bring happiness and fulfillment. Wealth was not merely gold, it was absolute power. It was the power to construct magnificent homes, to navigate the world's oceans, to savor exotic foods, to acquire masterful art, and to construct glorious temples. Realizing this profound truth, the young Arkad made a resolute vow to himself. He refused to stand on the periphery of life, watching enviously as others feasted while he settled for the scraps of poverty. He determined that he would claim his rightful seat at the banquet of abundance. Knowing he lacked the advantages of a wealthy inheritance or innate genius, Arkad deduced that achieving this grand ambition required two essential elements: time and deliberate study. Time, he noted, was universally available. Every man present had squandered enough time to have forged a massive fortune. Study, however, was twofold. It was the acquisition of known facts, but more importantly, it was the cultivation of the discipline required to uncover unknown truths. Arkad secured a humble position as a scribe in the city's Hall of Records, dedicating long, grueling hours to carving administrative text into moist clay. Month after weary month he labored, yet every copper he earned was instantly consumed by the necessities of survival: food, basic clothing, and mandatory tributes to the gods. Despite his relentless toil, his purse remained perpetually empty, though his determination never wavered. The turning point arrived with a visit from Algamish, a notoriously wealthy and demanding moneylender. Algamish required a copy of the 9th Law within 2 days, promising a meager 2 coppers for the rushed labor. When the deadline arrived and the exhausting work was incomplete, Algamish was furious. Sensing an opportunity born of desperation, Arkad boldly negotiated. He promised to carve through the night, sacrificing his sleep and his comfort if the great moneylender would teach him the secret to acquiring vast wealth. Amused by the scribe's audacity, Algamish agreed. Arkad labored through the darkness, his back aching and his eyes burning from the acrid smoke of the flickering wick. At dawn, the heavy tablets were finished. True to his word, the aged moneylender shared his foundational wisdom, comparing the fleeting, brilliant thoughts of youth to shooting meteors, and the enduring, proven knowledge of age to the fixed constellations that guide a sailor's course. Algamish leaned in and delivered the secret that had transformed him from a lowly sheepherder into a master of finance. He had found the road to wealth the moment he decided that a part of all he earned was his to keep. Arkad was initially utterly disappointed, arguing that he already kept everything he earned. The old man fiercely corrected this illusion. He demanded to know what Arkad had to show for the past month's labor or the past years. He pointed out that Arkad paid the garment maker, the sandal maker, and the food merchant. He paid everyone except himself. He was, in essence, a slave working solely for the sustenance and clothing provided by his masters. Algamish revealed the profound mathematics of wealth. If a man keeps merely 1/10 of his earnings, in 10 years he has saved a full year's wages. But this was only half the truth. Every single coin saved becomes a tireless worker, a slave dedicated to generating more wealth. Every copper that coin earns is a child that also goes to work. The initial saving is the seed from which a mighty tree of prosperity grows. The sooner the seed is planted, and the more faithfully it is nourished with consistent savings, the sooner a man may bask beneath its shade. Taking this wisdom to heart, Arkad began to faithfully extract 1/10 of his meager copper earnings before paying any other obligation. To his astonishment, his daily life suffered no noticeable lack. He adjusted to living on the remaining 9/10 with surprising ease. He resisted the temptation to spend his growing hoard on the luxurious goods brought by Phoenician merchants, protecting his burgeoning wealth. A 12th month later, Algamish returned to check on his pupil. Arkad proudly announced he had faithfully saved his 10th. However, when asked what he had done with the savings, Arkad confessed he had given the funds to Asmur, a brickmaker traveling across the sea to purchase rare Phoenician jewels. They planned to sell them upon his return and divide the profits. The old moneylender growled in dismay. He berated Arkad for trusting a brickmaker with the intricacies of gemology, comparing it to asking a breadmaker about the movements of the stars. The savings were gone, the roots of Arkad's wealth tree violently ripped from the soil. The Phoenicians, known scoundrels, had sold the foolish brickmaker worthless pieces of colored glass. Algamish commanded him to plant a new tree and delivered a crucial warning. Advice is freely given, but one must watch carefully that they only take what is worth having. Taking advice on savings from the inexperienced guarantees the loss of those savings. Undeterred, Arkad started again. After another year, he reported his progress to Algamish. This time, he had loaned his accumulated 10th to a shield maker named Aga to purchase bronze, collecting a reliable rental fee every 4 months for the use of the capital. Algamish approved, but inquired what Arkad did with the generated rental income. Arkad happily described hosting grand feasts with fine wine and spiced cakes, and purchasing a luxurious scarlet tunic. Once again, the mentor laughed at his student's folly. Arkad was devouring the children of his savings. How could those children multiply and work for him if he immediately consumed them? He must first build an impenetrable army of golden slaves. Only then could he enjoy the rich banquets of life without the bitter sting of regret. 2 more years passed before Algamish, now deeply lined and weary with advanced age, returned. He asked if Arkad had achieved his ultimate financial desires. Arkad admitted he had not yet reached his final goals, but he possessed a growing fortune that earned more money, which in turn earned even more. He had learned the 3 crucial steps: to live on less than he earned, to seek the counsel of competent experts who spoke from experience, and to compel his gold to work for him. Recognizing that Arkad had mastered the acquisition, retention, and multiplication of wealth, Algamish offered him a monumental opportunity. The old man's own sons thought only of spending and gave no thought to earning. His vast estates in Nippur required competent management, and he feared his interests were too great to handle alone. He invited Arkad to become his partner and steward. Because Arkad had meticulously prepared himself through unyielding discipline and study, he successfully expanded the holdings and eventually inherited a substantial portion of the estate under the law when Algamish passed into the sphere of darkness. Upon hearing this tale, one of the friends attributed Arkad's immense success to mere luck, noting how fortunate he was that Algamish chose him as an heir. Arkad vehemently rejected this notion. His only luck was the fierce, unwavering determination to save 1/10 of his earnings for 4 long years before the inheritance was ever a possibility. To call him lucky would be like calling a fisherman. Lucky who studies the wind and the habits of fish for years to perfect his cast. Opportunity, he explained, is a haughty goddess who refuses to waste her precious time on those who are unprepared. Another friend marveled at Arkad's unusual willpower to start over after losing his first year's savings to the brickmaker's folly. Arkad dismissed the concept of willpower as magical, brute strength. Willpower, he defined, is simply the unflinching, unyielding purpose to carry a self-assigned task through to its absolute completion. If he resolved to pick a pebble from the road and cast it into the stream every day for 100 days, he would do it. He would not substitute 2 pebbles the next day if he forgot, nor would he throw a handful on the 20th day and consider the task finished. This intense dedication to his own commitments forged the unshakable confidence required to achieve massive endeavors. Another friend questioned the logic, suggesting that if all men practiced this simple rule, there would not be enough wealth in the world to sustain it. Arkad countered that wealth grows magically wherever men exert energy. Building a grand palace does not destroy the gold used to pay for it. The gold is simply distributed to the brickmaker, the laborer, and the artist. The completed palace retains its value, and the land surrounding it becomes more valuable simply because the palace exists. There is no prophesied limit to the growth of wealth. Arkad imparted his final instructions to his aging friends. He urged them to take the wisdom of Algamish and brand it upon their minds. A part of all I earn is mine to keep. He told them to declare it upon waking at noon and at night until the words stood out like letters of fire across the sky. By paying themselves first, saving no less than 1/10, and arranging their lives to accommodate this new reality, they would soon experience the thrilling, empowering joy of possessing a treasure they alone commanded. As the treasure grew, it would stimulate a fierce desire to earn even more. From there, they must force their treasure into servitude, making its children and its children's children labor tirelessly on their behalf. He advised them to secure their future against the inevitable arrival of old age, and to protect their families from unexpected tragedy through small, regular provisions. He warned them to avoid the deceitful sirens of usurious returns, which lead only to the jagged rocks of loss and remorse, and to seek counsel exclusively from men whose daily lives revolved around the successful handling of money. Finally, he cautioned against becoming miserly. Once the 10th was saved, they must enjoy the rich, worthwhile experiences life offers without fear of spending the rest. As Arkad concluded, his friends departed. Some remained silent, lacking the imagination to grasp the profound simplicity of the lesson. Others were cynical, believing a man of such immense wealth should simply divide his fortune with his struggling companions. But in the eyes of a few, a new, intense light burned. They realized that the great moneylender had continually returned to the scribe's room not out of idle curiosity, but because he was carefully watching a man actively clawing his way out of the darkness of ignorance into the illuminating light of financial mastery. When that man was ready, a place awaited him. These enlightened few were the ones who returned to Arkad in the subsequent years. He welcomed them gladly, freely sharing his broad experience and guiding them to invest their savings safely and profitably. For them, the absolute turning point of their entire existence occurred on the day they finally internalized the enduring truth that passed from Algamish to Arkad and finally to them. The enduring glory of Babylon echoes down through the ages, its reputation cementing it as the richest of all ancient cities, brimming with fabulous treasures. Yet this staggering opulence was not a gift of nature or a constant state of existence. The immense riches of Babylon were entirely the result of the cultivated wisdom of its people. They did not begin with wealth. They first had to learn the meticulous art of becoming wealthy. When the good king, Sargon, returned triumphant to Babylon after decisively defeating his enemies, the Elamites, he was met not with universal celebration, but with a severe internal crisis. The royal chancellor gravely explained the situation to his sovereign. Following years of great prosperity, driven by the king's massive public works, the construction of the great irrigation canals and the mighty temples of the gods, these monumental projects were now complete. With the work finished, the common people seemingly possessed no means to support themselves. The laborers wandered without employment, the city's merchants saw only a trickle of customers, and the farmers found no buyers for their bountiful produce. A profound scarcity of gold gripped the populace, leaving them unable to purchase even basic food. Perplexed, King Sargon demanded to know where the vast sums of gold expended on these grand improvements had vanished. The Chancellor regretfully informed him that the wealth had funneled almost exclusively into the possession of a very small, elite group of incredibly rich men within the city. The gold had filtered through the fingers of the common laborers and tradesmen as swiftly as goat's milk drains through a coarse strainer. With the royal stream of gold now halted, the majority of the citizenry had absolutely nothing left to show for their years of grueling earnings. The king sat in deep contemplation. He questioned the fundamental justice and logic of a system where so few men could gather and monopolize all the gold. The Chancellor answered plainly that one cannot condemn a man for succeeding simply because he possesses the necessary knowledge. Furthermore, it would be a grave injustice to strip a man of the wealth he had fairly and legally earned merely to distribute it among those who lacked the ability to earn and keep it themselves. Accepting this, the king proposed a revolutionary idea. Why could not all the people be taught the specific knowledge required to accumulate gold, thereby transforming Babylon into a city where every citizen was rich and prosperous? The Chancellor agreed this was entirely possible, but noted a crucial lack of instructors. The priests, dedicated to spiritual matters, knew nothing of the harsh realities of making money. The king then demanded the name of the one man in all of Babylon who best understood the science of wealth. The Chancellor confirmed what the king already suspected. Arkad was universally acknowledged as the richest man in the empire. Upon the king's decree, Arkad appeared before the throne the following day. Despite his 70 years, he stood straight and sprightly. The king directly addressed him, verifying his legendary status and asking the origin of his vast fortune. Arkad humbly replied that he had merely taken advantage of the same opportunities that were freely available to every citizen of their good city. He confirmed that he had started with absolutely nothing but a burning, singular desire for wealth. Sargon laid bare the unhappy state of their city. A few men possessed the knowledge to acquire wealth and naturally monopolized it, while the vast majority of the citizens lacked the fundamental understanding of how to retain even a fraction of the gold that passed through their hands. It was the king's deepest desire that Babylon remain the wealthiest city in the known world, and to achieve this, it must be populated by a multitude of wealthy men. He asked Arkad if the secret to acquiring wealth was a practical science that could be taught. Arkad assured his sovereign that whatever one man has learned, he can absolutely teach to another. His eyes glowing with visionary purpose, Sargon asked Arkad to lend his life's wisdom to this great national cause. He proposed that Arkad establish a school for teachers, imparting his knowledge to a select group who would then disperse and instruct others, continuing the cycle until every worthy subject in the domain understood these truths. Bowing as a dutiful servant, Arkad eagerly accepted the command, pledging to gladly surrender his knowledge for the betterment of his fellow men and the eternal glory of his king. He instructed the Chancellor to assemble a class of 100 men, promising to teach them the 7 specific cures that had transformed his own purse from the leanest in Babylon to the fattest. A fortnight later, in strict compliance with the royal edict, the chosen 100 gathered in the grand hall of the Temple of Learning. They sat upon colorful rugs arranged in a wide semicircle. Before them sat Arkad, positioned beside a small tabouret that supported a smoking sacred lamp emitting a strange, pleasing fragrance. A low whisper rippled through the expectant students as they beheld the legendary figure, marveling that the richest man in the empire appeared as an ordinary mortal man. Arkad stood and addressed the assembly. He framed his presence as an act of duty to their great king, but also rooted it in his own profound empathy. He recalled his days as a poor youth desperately desiring gold, and having discovered the precise knowledge necessary to secure it, he was now commissioned to impart that exact wisdom. He reminded them that he had enjoyed no special advantages, starting his fortune in the most humble of circumstances. His very first storehouse of treasure had been a lean, uselessly empty purse that he deeply loathed. He had desperately wanted it to be round, full and heavy with the satisfying clink of gold. This driving dissatisfaction had led him to relentlessly seek every possible remedy for his poverty. Ultimately, he discovered 7 definitive cures. He announced to the assembled 100 that over the next 7 days, he would dedicate each day to thoroughly explaining one of these 7 remedies. He implored them to listen with the utmost attention, to fiercely debate the concepts with him, and to dissect the lessons amongst themselves. They must learn these truths with absolute perfection so they could first plant the vital seeds of wealth within their own lives. Only after they had successfully built their own fortunes, Arkad warned, would they be truly competent to teach these unyielding laws to the rest of Babylon. With a solemn and deliberate tone, Arkad prepared to initiate them into the foundational steps of financial mastery, stating that no man can climb to the temple of wealth without first planting his feet firmly upon the absolute bottom rung. The historical predicament facing King Sargon serves as a profound mirror for economic contemplation. Despite spearheading an era of monumental growth and public infrastructure, the Babylonian ruler found his populace impoverished the moment royal funding ceased, with the empire's gold having silently accumulated in the vaults of a wealthy few. This ancient imbalance requires a critical evaluation of our present era. One must deeply reflect upon whether this exact phenomenon, the rapid concentration of wealth and the subsequent struggle of the working class, remains a dominant and unresolved challenge within the fabric of contemporary society. When confronted by his sovereign, Arkad stripped away all complexities of his success, revealing that before he held a single coin of his vast fortune, his sole possession was an intense, unwavering desire for wealth. This stark admission demands a rigorous personal assessment. You must question whether you truly believe that a burning desire is the absolute solitary prerequisite for amassing a fortune. Should you believe that desire alone is insufficient, it is imperative to define exactly what other elements are required. Furthermore, this is the moment for unflinching psychological inventory. You must identify and meticulously catalogue any subconscious blocks, fears, or limiting beliefs that might be actively obstructing your own path to great riches. Upon the king's mandate, Arkad demonstrated a remarkable lack of possessiveness, enthusiastically agreeing to broadcast his hard-won financial secrets to the citizens of Babylon. This noble willingness challenges the modern wealth seeker's relationship with abundance. You are compelled to examine your own spirit of generosity. Consider whether, upon achieving your financial summit, you would eagerly share your successful strategies with the world, or if a latent fear of spawning future competitors would cause you to guard your knowledge in silence. You must thoroughly explore and explain the underlying reasons for your natural inclination. Before initiating his 100 chosen students into the mechanics of wealth, Arkad established a non-negotiable standard. None were permitted to teach these laws to others until they had irrefutably proven them by forging their own fortunes. This ancient mandate serves as a harsh but necessary lens through which to view modern financial instruction. Reflect deeply upon the books you have studied and the seminars you have attended in your quest for prosperity. Honestly evaluate how many of these contemporary experts and self-proclaimed gurus actually possess the immense self-generated wealth necessary to validate the very doctrines they preach. Looking beyond the acquisition of wealth to the responsibilities of true prosperity, you are asked to quantify your future generosity. Consider exactly how much time each month you will commit to mentoring others once your own financial independence is unshakably secured. To anchor this intention, engage in a deliberate visualization. Allow yourself to vividly experience the reality of having achieved your most ambitious financial goals. From this place of extreme wealth, envision yourself actively guiding and teaching others to climb the same mountain. Detail this mental projection thoroughly, capturing the emotions, the setting, and the profound satisfaction of lifting others toward the prosperity you have finally mastered. Arkad directed his attention to a contemplative individual seated in the second row of the gathered assembly. He inquired about the man's specific trade. The student responded that he was a scribe, earning his livelihood by carving records into clay tablets. Arkad nodded with recognition, noting that this was the exact labor by which he had earned his own initial coppers, thereby proving that the scribe possessed the identical opportunity to forge a fortune. Next, Arkad addressed a robust, florid-faced man situated further back, asking how he secured his daily bread. This man identified himself as a meat butcher. He explained his process of purchasing livestock from farmers, processing the meat for the city's housewives, and selling the remaining hides to the sandal makers. Arkad affirmed that because this man labored and earned a steady wage, he too held every advantage necessary to achieve great success. Methodically, Arkad proceeded through the class, questioning each man to understand the precise nature of his daily labor and income. When he had surveyed the varied professions of the room, he addressed them collectively. He pointed out the obvious truth. There are countless trades and occupations through which men acquire currency. Each method of earning acts as a distinct stream of gold. Through their daily labor, each worker diverts a portion of that golden stream into his own pocketbook. Therefore, regardless of their specific trade, a stream of coins, whether a modest trickle or a rushing current, flows into the purse of every single man present. The students murmured in agreement at this undeniable fact. Arkad then proposed a logical continuation. If every man harbored a genuine desire to build a lasting fortune, would it not be the highest wisdom to begin by utilizing the very source of wealth they had already established? Again, the assembly agreed. Singling out a humble participant who traded in eggs, Arkad presented a hypothetical scenario. He asked the merchant to imagine selecting one of his empty baskets. If every single morning the merchant placed exactly 10 eggs into this basket and every single evening he removed exactly 9 eggs, what would be the inevitable result? The egg merchant quickly answered that eventually the basket would overflow. When Arkad pressed for the reason, the merchant stated the obvious mathematics. Each day he was depositing 1 more egg than he was withdrawing. With a knowing smile, Arkad turned back to the entire class and asked if any man among them suffered from a lean, impoverished purse. At first, the students looked amused. Then, a wave of laughter rolled through the room, and in a gesture of collective jest, they all produced their flat, empty wallets and waved them in the air. Calming the assembly, Arkad revealed the first great remedy he had discovered for a depleted pocketbook. He instructed them to do exactly as he had proposed to the egg merchant. For every 10 coins they deposited into their purses from their daily labor, they were to extract and spend only 9. He promised that, with absolute certainty, their purses would immediately begin to fatten. The increasing weight of the coins would soon become a physical comfort in their hands, bringing a profound sense of satisfaction and security to their souls. He sternly warned them not to dismiss this advice simply because it sounded overly simplistic. Truth, he reminded them, is always unadorned and straightforward. He had promised to reveal the exact method by which he built his massive fortune, and this singular practice was his true beginning. He recounted his own days of carrying a miserably lean purse, cursing its emptiness because it contained nothing to satisfy his earthly desires. But the very moment he restricted his spending to only 9/10 of his earnings, his wealth began to accumulate. He assured them that theirs would do exactly the same. Arkad then shared a mysterious phenomenon, a truth he acknowledged he did not fully understand. When he definitively ceased spending more than 9/10 of his income, he discovered that he managed to survive and live just as comfortably as he had before. He experienced no greater shortage of funds. Furthermore, as time passed, he noticed that new coins seemed to flow into his life with far greater ease. He speculated that it must be an immutable law of the gods. Wealth is naturally drawn to the man who retains a portion of his earnings, while gold actively avoids the man whose purse remains perpetually empty. He challenged the students to deeply examine their true desires. He asked them to choose what they wanted most in life. Did they seek the fleeting gratification of their daily whims? A sparkling jewel, a piece of finery, a richer meal, things that are rapidly consumed and entirely forgotten? Or did they hunger for substantial, enduring possessions? Solid gold, expansive lands, thriving herds, valuable merchandise, and investments that yield a continuous income. The coins they carelessly removed from their purses purchased the former, the fleeting illusions of wealth. But the coins they had the discipline to leave within their purses would ultimately purchase the latter, the foundation of true prosperity. This, Arkad concluded, was the first and most vital cure. For every 10 coins earned, spend but 9. He invited them to debate this law amongst themselves and, if any man could prove it false, to challenge him the following day. Arkad's counsel to preserve 1/10 of all generated income presents a fascinating paradox. The forfeiture of this fraction does not fundamentally diminish one's quality of life. The realization that one can live just as comfortably without that 10th requires deep personal reflection. One must look back at moments when funds were unexpectedly set aside and acknowledge that their absence was barely felt in the rhythm of daily survival. To truly implement this wisdom today, the modern wealth builder must explore seamless, automated methods of reserving these funds, ensuring the 10th is securely captured before the temptation to consume it can even arise. Furthermore, Arkad observed a mystical shift within his own reality. Once this financial commitment was made, wealth seemed to flow to him with far less friction. He posited that it is a divine, immutable law that gold gravitates naturally toward the man who disciplines his spending and guards his reserves. This demands a profound inquiry into the nature of intention and consequence. One must consider why the disciplined act of saving magnetically attracts further abundance, and whether personal experiences confirm that taking decisive, protective action over one's finances mysteriously eases the acquisition of greater wealth. Conversely, the stark assertion is made that prosperity actively shuns the individual who tolerates an empty pocketbook. The philosophical weight of this statement must be carefully weighed. Does the universe truly turn its back on those who dwell in the consciousness of lack? Ultimately, the seeker must confront a fundamental choice regarding their deepest earthly desires. Arkad draws a sharp, unforgiving line between the fleeting thrill of immediate gratification, the temporary finery, the rich foods, the quick indulgences that are rapidly consumed and entirely forgotten, and the enduring power of substantial assets, such as land, investments, and generating income. The challenge is to measure your own willingness to sacrifice the momentary pleasures of today for the unshakable financial security of tomorrow. Finally, armed with these reflections, one must define the specific immediate choices that will be made to further construct a personal, impenetrable fortress of wealth. Book, Part. Chapter: The Second Cure. On the second day of instruction, Arkad addressed a pressing concern that had arisen among his eager students. They posed a logical dilemma. How can a man possibly reserve 1/10 of his earnings when his entire income is scarcely sufficient to cover the absolute necessities of life? Arkad countered this question with a masterful observation. He reminded the assembly that on the previous day, every single man had confessed to carrying a depleted, lean wallet. Yet within that very room, there was a vast disparity in their earning power. Some possessed highly lucrative trades, while others earned a mere pittance. Some supported large, demanding families, while others had few dependents. Despite these significant differences in income and obligation, their financial destitution was identical. From this, Arkad unveiled a profound, often uncomfortable truth about human nature. What we automatically categorize as necessary expenses possess a deceptive elasticity. They will inevitably expand to consume every available coin of our income unless we actively and vigorously protest against this expansion. He issued a stern warning. One must never blur the line between basic survival necessities and the boundless realm of personal desires. Every individual alongside their families harbors a multitude of yearnings that far exceed their earning capacity. Even with immense wealth, Arkad confessed, human limitations of time, physical strength, the capacity to consume, and the distance one can travel make it impossible to satisfy every craving. Desires, he explained, are like weeds in a farmer's field. They will sprout and spread aggressively wherever there is even a sliver of space for their roots to take hold. To combat this endless proliferation of wants, Arkad instructed his students to conduct a ruthless examination of their daily living habits. Within the comforting routines of daily life lie countless accepted expenditures that can be intelligently reduced or entirely eliminated. He offered a guiding principle: demand absolute, 100% recognized value for every single coin that leaves your hand. He commanded them to physically engrave upon their clay tablets every item they wished to purchase. From this comprehensive list, they were to extract only those things that were absolutely vital for survival, along with any highly valued desires that could be comfortably acquired using only the remaining 9/10 of their income. The rest of the list must be violently struck through, relegated to the vast, unavoidable graveyard of unsatisfied human whims, and entirely forgotten without a shred of regret. This refined list becomes the budget. The sacred 1/10 must remain untouched, fiercely guarded as the fulfillment of the greatest desire of all, the desire for lasting wealth. The budget is not a static document. It is an active, vital assistant, a defensive shield protecting the growing treasury from the assault of impulsive spending. At this juncture, a student adorned in vibrant red and gold robes stood up in open rebellion. He declared himself a free man, insisting it was his fundamental right to enjoy the splendors of the earth. He vehemently rejected the concept of a budget, likening it to the oppressive harness of a beast of burden. To restrict his spending, he argued, would strip the joy from his existence and reduce him to a mere pack-ass toiling under a heavy load. Arkad calmly dismantled this protest. He asked the defiant student who would be the master dictating this budget. The student proudly replied that he would design it himself. Arkad then posed a penetrating question. If a beast of burden were granted the intellect to pack its own load for a grueling desert crossing, would it choose to burden itself with heavy bars of gold, luxurious rugs, and heavy jewels? Certainly not. It would intelligently pack only what was essential for the journey: nourishing hay, sustaining grain, and ample water. The true purpose of the budget, Arkad elucidated, is not to enslave, but to liberate. It exists to guarantee the fattening of the purse. It is a strategic tool designed to ensure that basic necessities are met, and that the most deeply cherished, profound desires are defended against the sabotage of fleeting, casual impulses. Like a brilliant torch illuminating the shadows of a dark cavern, the budget exposes the hidden leaks draining one's wealth, empowering the individual to seal them and redirect their golden stream toward truly gratifying objectives. This, Arkad proclaimed, is the second cure for an impoverished existence. Impose strict control over your expenditures through a conscious budget, ensuring that you can afford your true necessities and your most elevated desires, all while never breaching the sacred boundary of spending more than 9/10 of your hard-earned gold. Book, Part. Chapter, Study Guide. The second cure. Control thy expenditures. The second lesson hinges on a challenging assertion. The expenses we deem absolutely necessary possess an insidious tendency to inflate until they match our total income unless we aggressively intervene. This requires a brutally honest audit of your own financial behavior to determine if this phenomenon dictates your reality. To master this, one must separate truth from rationalization. You are tasked with compiling a complete inventory of your outgoing wealth, dividing these expenditures into two distinct categories: the unyielding necessities of survival and the optional luxuries of desire. Once this division is made, a deeper scrutiny is required. You must interrogate your list of necessities, actively seeking out hidden indulgences disguised as needs, and strip them away. Following this, you must attack your list of desires, surgically removing future expenses to immediately elevate your capacity to save. Arkad's philosophy demands 100% appreciated value for every coin surrendered. You must contemplate the profound meaning of this standard. It asks you to weigh the true, lasting worth of every purchase against the life energy required to earn that coin. Applying this strict metric to your remaining desires will inevitably reveal further expenditures that can be abandoned in favor of building wealth. The instruction to feel absolutely no regret for these abandoned desires is a crucial psychological shift. You must observe the emotional resistance that arises when crossing items off your list and discover the internal mechanisms necessary to transform that sense of loss into a feeling of empowerment. Your budget must be elevated from a restrictive ledger to your fiercest defender. You are asked to rate your absolute dedication to prioritizing your savings over the fleeting thrill of consumption. To solidify this commitment, a powerful exercise in mental projection is required. You must vividly construct a vision of your life brimming with absolute financial security and boundless abundance, a reality where your most profound aspirations are fully funded. Contrast the immense weight of that future freedom against the minor, temporary sting of sacrificing a small, present-day luxury. This comparison inevitably shifts the perspective on what constitutes true sacrifice. Finally, recognizing the budget as a brilliant light exposing the financial leaks in the dark caverns of your habits, you must confront your current practices. If you operate without this vital tool, you are operating blindly. The mandate is clear. Initiate a rigorous tracking of every outgoing coin, analyze every deviation from your intended path, and ensure, without exception, that the foundational tenth of your earnings is securely preserved. On the third day of their gathering, Arkad gazed upon the faces of his students, noting a subtle but profound shift in their demeanor. The despair of empty pockets had begun to lift. He acknowledged their progress. They had successfully initiated the fattening of their purses by fiercely preserving 1/10 of their earnings, and they had valiantly defended this growing treasure by imposing strict control over their daily expenditures. Yet, he cautioned, this was merely the foundation. To possess a purse heavy with gold is deeply gratifying to the soul of a miser, but stagnant coins, however numerous, do not constitute true wealth. The gold preserved from one's daily labor is nothing more than a dormant seed. It is the earnings generated by that preserved gold that will ultimately construct a towering fortune. Arkad posed a vital question to the assembly. How does a man force his idle gold into active servitude? He confessed that his own initial attempt at investment had ended in catastrophic failure, a bitter tale of lost treasure he promised to detail at a later time. However, his first truly triumphant venture involved a strategic alliance with an honorable shield maker named Aga. Each year, Aga required a massive influx of bronze from across the treacherous seas to forge his weapons. Lacking the immense capital needed to purchase these shipments outright, Aga sought the backing of men holding surplus coin. He was a man of unshakable integrity, promising not only the return of the principal but also a highly generous rental fee once his magnificent shields were sold to the king's armies. Arkad did not merely collect this rental fee to consume it in celebration. With calculated, unwavering discipline, he reinvested every copper of the profit back into Agar's enterprise. The profound result was a dual expansion. His original capital swelled, and simultaneously the subsequent rental fees multiplied exponentially. The return of these compounding sums into his purse was a source of supreme, empowering gratification. Here, Arkad delivered a core tenet of his financial philosophy. A man's true wealth is never defined by the static coins resting in his pocket. True wealth is the continuous, unyielding income he engineers, a rushing golden stream that perpetually flows into his treasury, keeping it eternally full regardless of his daily efforts. This is the ultimate objective of every ambitious heart, an autonomous income that relentlessly replenishes itself, whether the master is toiling at his bench or journeying across distant lands. Through rigorous application of this principle, Arkad revealed he had amassed an income so vast that the empire hailed him as a titan of wealth. His initial, modest loans to the shieldmaker served as his foundational apprenticeship in the art of profitable investment. As his financial wisdom matured and his capital expanded, he aggressively diversified his deployments. What began as a single rivulet of income eventually transformed into a mighty delta, with wealth flowing from countless varied sources directly into his command. He had, in essence, bred an invincible army of golden slaves. Each individual coin was a tireless laborer, dedicated solely to the task of unearthing more gold. As these golden slaves toiled, they birthed children, new coins that were immediately drafted into the same relentless labor. Soon the children's children joined the ranks, creating an immense, compounding force of wealth generation that staggered the imagination. To illustrate the staggering velocity of this compounding force, Arkad shared a poignant parable. A humble farmer, celebrating the birth of his firstborn son, entrusted 10 pieces of solid silver to a reputable moneylender. He commanded that this silver be kept on rental until the boy reached his 20th year. The moneylender agreed, offering a return of 1/4 the principal's value every 4 years. The crucial element of the farmer's directive was that all earned rental fees must be immediately fused with the original principal. When the son finally stood at the threshold of manhood at age 20, the farmer sought an accounting. The moneylender revealed that through the silent, relentless mathematics of compounding interest, the initial 10 pieces of silver had swelled to over 30 pieces. Thrilled by this growth and recognizing the son did not yet require the funds, the farmer allowed the investment to remain undisturbed. Decades passed. The farmer eventually departed for the world of spirits. When the son reached his 50th year, he returned to the moneylender to claim his inheritance. The final settlement was breathtaking. The original 10 pieces of silver had exploded into an astounding 167 pieces. Over half a century, the dormant seed had multiplied itself nearly 17 times over, entirely through the labor of its own offspring. With undeniable clarity, Arkad proclaimed the third vital cure for a lean purse. Every single coin must be put to labor. It must be commanded to reproduce its own kind, multiplying as abundantly as the flocks grazing upon the fertile fields. By doing so, a man weaves an unbreakable stream of income, guaranteeing a river of wealth that will flow into his life without end. Book Dasher Parte Chapter Study Guide The Third Cure Make Thy Gold Multiply. The transition from merely saving wealth to actively multiplying it marks a critical evolution in financial mastery. Arkad's assertion that preserved gold is merely the starting line demands an unflinching review of your current accumulated assets. You must determine if your money is lying dormant or if it is actively laboring on your behalf. A rigorous inventory is required. You must meticulously catalog every existing investment, recording the initial capital deployed and evaluating its current compounded value. This exercise reveals the true velocity of your wealth. The ultimate financial sanctuary is defined by Arkad as an autonomous income that flows unceasingly, regardless of whether you are actively working or enjoying leisure. This concept requires you to define your own threshold of absolute financial security. You must calculate the precise minimum reservoir of savings required to generate an income that completely sustains your existence without further labor. Accompanying this calculation must be a determination of the ideal realistic interest rate necessary to achieve this perpetual growth. The profound power of compound interest, the phenomenon of earning interest upon previously earned interest, is the engine of monumental wealth. If this mathematical law is not intimately understood, it must become an immediate subject of intense study until it can be effortlessly explained to another. Applying this law to your previously calculated security threshold, you are tasked with projecting the explosive growth of your savings across horizons of 5, 10, 25, and 50 years. Witnessing these projected numbers provides the psychological fuel required to maintain long-term financial discipline. As this golden stream widens and surplus income becomes a reality, the focus shifts to the deployment of this ultimate freedom. You must unleash your imagination to vividly construct the reality of boundless wealth. Strip away all limitations and detail the exact nature of the life you will command. Define the magnificent estates you will possess, the global expeditions you will undertake, and the innovative enterprises you will control or fund. True wealth, however, carries the profound privilege of philanthropy. You are challenged to envision how you will wield your immense resources to alleviate suffering and inject joy into the human experience. Imagine the absolute power of establishing enduring charitable trusts or sweeping scholarship funds. Deliberately visualize the specific individuals or communities whose destinies will be fundamentally altered by your benevolence. Allow yourself to deeply feel the emotional resonance and supreme satisfaction of elevating others. Finally, this mastery of multiplication must be grounded in immediate action. The act of giving cannot be entirely postponed until massive wealth is achieved. You must examine your current life to discover avenues of contribution, whether through the volunteering of time, the offering of energy, or the sharing of modest financial resources. Initiating this flow of generosity, regardless of its current size, actively aligns your mindset with the consciousness of true, overflowing abundance. On the fourth day of their assembly, Arkad delivered a solemn and urgent warning regarding the precarious nature of newly acquired wealth. He cautioned his students that the moment a man's purse begins to swell, he inadvertently becomes a shining beacon for misfortune and predatory schemes. A growing treasury must be defended with an iron will, for gold left unguarded is swiftly and inevitably lost. It is a fundamental law of prosperity that an individual must first master the discipline of fiercely protecting a modest accumulation of wealth before the universe will ever entrust him with a massive, enduring fortune. Every man who manages to gather a surplus of coin will inevitably face the seductive temptation of seemingly brilliant, rapid growth investments. Often, these alluring propositions are passionately championed by well-meaning friends and family members who have been swept up in the intoxicating, blinding promise of sudden, effortless riches. Arkad implored his students to recognize the absolute, unyielding foundation of all successful financial deployment, the supreme security of the principal capital. He challenged the fundamental logic of chasing exorbitant, thrilling returns if the core foundation of the investment, the original hard-earned gold, is placed in mortal peril. The inevitable penalty of embracing such high-risk ventures is the agonizing destruction of the wealth itself. A wise man must violently reject his own romantic, impatient desires to multiply his riches overnight. Before a single coin is surrendered as a loan, the lender must ruthlessly and objectively investigate the borrower's true capacity to repay, alongside his historical reputation for honoring his debts. To fail in this rigorous investigation is to unknowingly transform a hard-won investment into a foolish, unrecoverable gift. Similarly, before committing funds to any new enterprise or industry, one must become intimately acquainted with every hidden danger, market fluctuation, and potential pitfall that could potentially devastate the venture. To cement this critical truth, Arkad humbly laid bare the tragic fate of his own very first year of savings. Blinded by the desire for rapid, massive multiplication, he had foolishly handed his entire accumulated hoard to Azmur, a simple brickmaker preparing to travel across the sea to Tyre. They had concocted a naive scheme wherein Azmur would purchase rare, priceless jewels from the Phoenician merchants, which they would later sell in Babylon for a staggering profit. The result was a devastating, humiliating lesson in the boundaries of competence. The Phoenicians, instantly recognizing Azmur's total ignorance of gemology, easily swindled him, trading him worthless shards of colored glass for Arkad's precious gold. The treasure, born of a year of grueling sacrifice and discipline, was entirely annihilated. Arkad noted grimly that, with his current mature wisdom, the sheer absurdity of dispatching a brickmaker to evaluate and negotiate for precious stones would be instantly obvious. From the ashes of this bitter early failure, Arkad forged an ironclad directive for his followers. He commanded them to never rely solely upon their own limited understanding or unverified optimism when deploying their wealth into the world. They must actively and aggressively seek out the counsel of seasoned experts, men whose daily successful lives are deeply entrenched in the profitable, secure management of money. The profound beauty of this expert advice, he noted, is that it is frequently offered without charge by those who have already succeeded, yet its true, tangible value is exactly equal to the massive sums of gold it prevents from being destroyed. Thus, Arkad proclaimed the fourth essential remedy for an impoverished existence. You must fiercely protect your growing fortune from the ravages of careless loss. Invest your gold exclusively in fortresses of safety where the principal remains perfectly secure, where the capital can be reclaimed upon your demand, and where a fair, reliable return is absolutely guaranteed. Banish the treacherous illusions of instant magical wealth and constantly defer to the battle-tested wisdom of those who have already mastered the heavy, demanding responsibility of guarding gold. The opening premise of this contemplation asserts that misfortune is naturally drawn to a shining mark, making it imperative that any acquired wealth be shielded with absolute firmness. This ancient wisdom suggests that the universe tests our capacity to protect small accumulations before entrusting us with massive fortunes. A rigorous examination of your own life, or the lives of those around you, is required to determine if this magnetic attraction between newly acquired wealth and sudden misfortune is a verifiable reality. The temptation of seemingly brilliant, highly plausible investments is a universal trial for anyone possessing surplus gold. You must reflect upon moments when the promise of vast, sudden riches seduced your judgment, resulting in negligible gains or devastating losses. Conversely, it is equally important to analyze any investments that defied expectations and yielded tremendous success, dissecting the exact reasons for that triumph. The influence of eager friends and relatives championing these ventures must also be scrutinized, particularly evaluating whether the introduction of financial transactions has ever strained or poisoned those personal relationships. Arkad's core principle dictates that the first rule of investment is the absolute security of the principal. You must quantify your own tolerance for risk, defining precisely what percentage of your accumulated wealth you are genuinely willing to sacrifice in the pursuit of greater gains. This demands a commitment to meticulous, unyielding study before parting with a single coin. If this disciplined research is not currently a habit, a firm commitment must be made to dedicate significant time each week to the rigorous analysis of potential investments, capturing these findings in a dedicated journal. The seductive allure of rapid wealth must be confronted. You are asked to interrogate your own impatience and determine if a romanticized desire for instant riches is clouding your judgment. True financial maturity requires a willingness to embrace long-term, deliberate growth over the fleeting thrill of a rapid gamble. Furthermore, before extending any loan or trusting an agent with your capital, an exhaustive investigation into their character, track record, and historical competence is absolutely mandatory. This involves actively researching the worst-case scenarios for every potential investment, staring unflinchingly at the dangers that might beset it. Finally, you must conquer the arrogance of relying solely upon your own inexperienced wisdom. The mandate is to actively seek the counsel of proven experts. However, recognizing that such elite advice often commands a price, you must calculate the true value of their expertise and determine what percentage of your potential return you are willing to surrender in exchange for their protective guidance. A brutal accounting of your past behavior is necessary. You must identify the specific destructive ways in which you have previously squandered or poorly invested your savings and forge an impenetrable set of preventative measures to guarantee that your current treasury remains eternally secure. Book. Part. Chapter. The Fifth Cure. When the fifth day dawned, Arkad once again stood before his attentive assembly, guiding them toward the next monumental pillar of financial independence. He reminded them that they had already established the discipline of living upon 9/10 of their earnings. However, if any portion of those 9 parts could be intelligently redirected into a profitable investment without diminishing their daily well-being, their wealth would multiply with far greater velocity. He drew their attention to the heartbreaking reality of so many families in Babylon. Countless men were raising their children in dismal, unseemly quarters, paying exorbitant, unrelenting rentals to exacting landlords. In these cramped spaces, their wives had not a single patch of earth to cultivate the blooms that bring joy to a woman's soul, and their children were relegated to playing their games in the filth of the city's narrow alleys. Arkad presented a profound truth. The human spirit cannot fully flourish without a connection to the earth. A family requires a plot of clean ground where children can play safely and where a wife can raise both beautiful blossoms and nourishing herbs for their sustenance. The sheer gladness that swells in a man's heart when he consumes the figs from his own trees and the grapes from his own vines is immeasurable. To stand as the master of his own domicile, to possess a sanctuary he is fiercely proud to maintain, injects a deep, unshakable confidence into a man's soul and breathes greater power into all of his earthly endeavors. Therefore, Arkad vehemently recommended that every man must own the roof that shelters him and his family. He assured his students that this ambition was not a distant fantasy, but a highly attainable reality for any man of determined intention. He pointed out that their magnificent king had massively expanded the defensive walls of Babylon, enclosing vast tracts of unused land that could be acquired for highly reasonable sums. Furthermore, Arkad revealed the favorable disposition of the city's financiers toward this specific ambition. The moneylenders of Babylon, he explained, looked with great favor upon men seeking to acquire land and construct homes for their families. If a man could demonstrate that he had diligently saved a reasonable portion of the necessary capital, he could readily secure a loan to pay the brickmakers and the builders for such a noble, commendable purpose. Once the home was erected, the financial dynamic fundamentally shifted. Instead of handing his hard-earned silver to a landlord in an endless, unrecoverable cycle of rent, the man would simply pay the moneylender with that exact same regularity. Because every single payment actively reduced his total indebtedness, a few short years of discipline would completely extinguish the loan. When that final payment was made, the man would stand victorious. His heart would be light, for he would possess absolute unencumbered ownership of a highly valuable estate, with his only remaining obligation being the modest taxes levied by the king. His wife would walk to the river with greater joy to wash their garments, returning with goatskins of water to lovingly nourish their own growing gardens. The blessings that cascade upon the man who owns his own home are plentiful. Most crucially, this ownership massively reduces the overall cost of living, thereby freeing up an even greater portion of his earnings to be directed toward the profound pleasures and elevated desires of his existence. This, Arkad concluded with ringing certainty, is the fifth cure for a lean purse. Own thy own home. Book, Part. Chapter. Study Guide. The fifth cure. Make of thy dwelling a profitable investment. Arkad's teachings on the fifth cure elevate the concept of home ownership beyond a mere financial transaction, framing it as a vital necessity for the flourishing of the human spirit. The assertion that a family requires clean earth for play and cultivation demands a critical evaluation of your current living environment. You must meticulously weigh the advantages and disadvantages of your present dwelling, determining if it truly supports and elevates the lifestyle you envision for yourself and your loved ones. The psychological and emotional dividends of possessing a personal garden are profoundly highlighted. Cultivating the earth, whether for the sheer beauty of the foliage or the sustenance of the harvest, brings a deep primal satisfaction. If you are currently disconnected from this experience, you are challenged to explore your desires regarding this connection to nature and articulate why a personal sanctuary of earth appeals to your spirit. Furthermore, you must assess the pride you take in your home. It must be a sanctuary comfortable enough to welcome guests with dignity. If it falls short of this standard, decisive action steps must be identified to elevate its condition. The central mandate of this cure is absolute ownership of the roof that shelters you. If you are currently trapped in the cycle of renting, you must confront your desires and readiness to transition to ownership. Arkad advised his students to leverage the capital of others to achieve this goal. You must honestly evaluate your own collateral and determine if you possess the financial foundation required to secure such a loan, while simultaneously analyzing your own psychological comfort with assuming this specific type of debt. If you already hold the title to a home burdened by a mortgage, the mandate shifts to rigorous financial optimization. You must actively investigate the lending market to ensure you are commanding the most advantageous interest rates available, refinancing if necessary. Arkad painted a victorious picture of the homeowner, liberated from all costs save the king's taxes. However, the modern reality of home ownership introduces complexities of maintenance, insurance, and unforeseen liabilities. This requires a sophisticated mathematical confrontation between the philosophy of renting and the philosophy of owning. You are tasked with constructing a comprehensive cost-variance analysis. This ledger must ruthlessly compare the total, long-term costs of renting, including inevitable rent increases and the lack of equity generation, against the full spectrum of home ownership expenses, encompassing the mortgage, property taxes, structural upkeep, and the cost of living. Ultimately, the results of this rigorous financial modeling must be weighed against Arkad's ancient wisdom. You must determine if the acquisition of a home will, in fact, drastically reduce your long-term cost of living, thereby liberating a larger portion of your golden stream to finance the ultimate gratification of your most profound desires. Arkad addressed his attentive students on the 6th day, shifting their focus toward the inevitable passage of time and the undeniable trajectory of human existence. Every mortal journeys steadily from the dawn of childhood into the twilight of old age, a path from which no man can deviate unless the gods summon him prematurely to the world beyond. Therefore, Arkad reasoned, it is an absolute necessity for every individual to prepare a sustaining income for those future days when his physical strength wanes and he is no longer young. Furthermore, a man must make concrete provisions for his family, ensuring they are comforted and financially supported should he suddenly pass into the great darkness and leave them behind. This specific lesson, Arkad declared, was dedicated to the vital task of guaranteeing a full purse during the years when a man's capacity to learn and labor has diminished. A man who has grasped the immutable laws of wealth and successfully cultivated a growing surplus must extend his vision far into the future. He is obligated to carefully plan specific investments that will endure safely over decades, remaining intact and readily available when those anticipated years of reduced vitality finally arrive. Arkad explained that there are several diverse methods by which a man can secure this future. Some might choose to bury a secret hoard of coins in a hidden location. However, Arkad fiercely warned against this practice, noting that no matter how cleverly a treasure is concealed, it remains highly vulnerable to the relentless hands of thieves. A far superior strategy, he suggested, is the acquisition of real estate. If a man intelligently selects houses or lands based on their future usefulness and enduring value, these properties become permanent, unshakable assets. As the years progress, these wisely chosen lands can be sold for a substantial profit, or their ongoing rental yields can provide a continuous, sustaining income tailored exactly to the owner's future needs. Another highly effective method of future preservation is entrusting a small, consistent sum to a reputable moneylender, allowing it to compound at regular intervals. To illustrate this, Arkad shared the story of Ansan, a humble sandal maker. Ansan confided that for 8 consecutive years, he had faithfully deposited 2 pieces of silver with his lender every single week. When the moneylender finally provided a comprehensive accounting of this disciplined practice, Ansan was overwhelmed with joy. The continuous accumulation of these modest deposits, combined with the customary rental rate of 1/4 their value applied every 4 years, had swelled his account to a staggering 1,040 pieces of silver. Arkad, utilizing his profound mastery of numbers, had further encouraged the sandal maker by projecting his future wealth. He demonstrated that if Ansan simply maintained this exact rhythm of depositing 2 pieces of silver a week for another 12 years, the moneylender would eventually owe him 4,000 pieces of silver, a massive sum that would provide a worthy, unshakable financial competence for the remainder of his life. When such minimal, regular payments can reliably produce such magnificent, profitable results, Arkad argued, absolutely no man can justify failing to ensure a treasure for his old age and the ultimate protection of his loved ones. Looking into the future of finance, Arkad expressed a visionary belief that humanity would eventually devise sophisticated systems to ensure against death. He imagined a monumental plan where thousands of men would regularly contribute a tiny, trifling sum, creating a massive collective aggregate that would instantly provide a handsome fortune to the family of any member who passed into the beyond. Arkad saw this as a highly desirable and immensely beneficial concept. However, he recognized that such an operation was impossible in his current era, as it would require an institution as stable as the king's throne, capable of operating far beyond the lifespan of any single man or conventional partnership. Because they were bound to the realities of their present day, Arkad commanded his students to utilize the proven methods currently available to them. It is a brutal, agonizing tragedy for an elderly man who can no longer earn to be burdened by a lean purse, just as it is a devastating catastrophe for a family to be left destitute without its provider. Therefore, the 6th cure for a lean purse was made unequivocally clear. You must forcefully provide in advance for the inevitable needs of your growing age and construct an unshakable financial shield for the absolute protection of your family. Book, Part Barbas, Chapter: Study. Guide. The sixth cure: ensure a future income. This chapter challenges the reader to confront the inevitable realities of aging and mortality. Arkad's mandate to prepare a suitable income for the days when youth has faded and to construct a financial safety net for one's family after death requires a profound and immediate personal audit. You must deeply examine whether you have taken concrete, actionable steps to secure this specific type of future income. If you have initiated these preparations, it is necessary to rigorously catalogue and evaluate them. If you have neglected this duty, you must fiercely interrogate the underlying reasons and excuses preventing you from doing so. The provisions you have established must be tested against the unforgiving metric of time. You must determine if your current investments are truly safe, designed to endure for decades, and easily accessible to your loved ones when the critical moment arrives. Arkad explicitly warned against the primitive practice of hiding physical wealth, as it inevitably falls prey to thieves. This serves as a metaphor for any unsecure or undocumented assets in the modern era. You must reflect on whether you possess hidden reserves that are vulnerable and immediately take steps to transfer them to impenetrable fortresses of security, such as a formal safety deposit box. Real estate and land acquisition are presented as enduring pillars of future security. If you currently possess property, you must ensure that all related contracts and official documents are impeccably organized, clearly recorded within your will, and effortlessly accessible to your heirs. If you have not yet entered the realm of property ownership, you are challenged to define your ambitions in this sector. You must envision the exact nature and volume of land you wish to acquire, establishing a definitive timeline for ownership. Allow yourself to mentally inhabit this future reality, deeply feeling the profound sense of unshakable security that accompanies the outright ownership of valuable earth, and document the emotions and insights born of this visualization. The narrative of Ansan the Sandalmaker dramatically illustrates the miraculous compounding power of consistent incremental investments over long periods. While the ancient practice of loaning directly to a singular moneylender has evolved into complex modern banking and investment structures, the foundational principle remains identical. You must critically examine your own participation in these compounding systems. The modern financial landscape is characterized by constant fluctuations and waves of interest. It is your duty to educate yourself relentlessly on how to navigate these tides to maximize the compounding effect on your long-term wealth. Finally, Arkad's prophetic vision of a collective death benefit directly mirrors the modern institution of life insurance. You must evaluate your current life insurance portfolio, determining if it is truly a wise investment and mathematically sufficient to completely replace your economic value for your family upon your demise. The tragedy of an impoverished elderly individual or a destitute fatherless family is an agonizing reality that must be aggressively prevented. You are urged to observe the devastating consequences suffered by families who failed to plan and use that sobering reality as fuel to thoroughly research and secure the ultimate protective barrier for your own legacy. On the seventh and final day of his instruction, Arkad stood before his assembly, his presence commanding a profound and respectful silence. He announced that this concluding remedy for an impoverished purse would diverge from the mechanics of finance. He would not speak of coins, investments, or budgets. Instead, he would speak directly of the men seated before him. He intended to illuminate the invisible forces within a man's mind and the daily habits of his existence that ultimately dictate his triumph or his ruin. To illustrate this, Arkad recounted a recent encounter with a young man who had come to him desperately seeking a loan. When Arkad inquired about the necessity of the debt, the youth complained that his current earnings were completely insufficient to cover his daily survival. Arkad immediately recognized a fundamental flaw and bluntly informed the young man that he was an exceedingly poor candidate for a loan. Lacking any surplus earning capacity, he possessed no realistic means of ever repaying the borrowed gold. The true necessity, Arkad had advised him, was not to borrow, but to earn more. He challenged the youth, asking what specific actions he was taking to actively increase his earning capacity. The young man had responded with a tale of frustration, claiming he had done everything possible. He recounted how, over the course of 2 months, he had approached his employer no less than 6 times to beg for an increase in his wages, only to be repeatedly denied. He felt he had exhausted all avenues. Arkad smiled at the young man's naive simplicity, yet he recognized a crucial foundational element within him. The youth possessed a fierce, burning desire to earn more. This desire, Arkad explained to his students, is the absolute prerequisite for any achievement. However, desire alone is a volatile and often useless force if it is not properly focused. General, sweeping desires, such as the simple wish to be wealthy, are nothing more than weak, fleeting longings that evaporate under pressure. For a man to merely wish for riches is a pointless exercise, but for a man to desire exactly 5 pieces of gold is a tangible, specific objective. It is a target that can be relentlessly pursued until it is completely fulfilled. Once a man has successfully harnessed his willpower to secure that specific small sum, he has fundamentally trained his mind and disciplined his actions. He can then deploy those exact same proven strategies to acquire 10 pieces of gold, then 20, and eventually 1,000. This is the precise methodical process by which massive fortunes are constructed. Wealth is never acquired in a single magical sweep. It is gathered first in modest, deliberate amounts which gradually increase in scale as the man himself grows more capable and educated in the laws of accumulation. Therefore, Arkad instructed, all desires must be simple, sharp, and highly defined. A desire that is too complex, too scattered, or vastly beyond a man's current level of training will inevitably collapse under its own weight and defeat its very purpose. As a man perfects his craft and elevates his calling, his ability to command greater wealth naturally rises in tandem. Arkad drew upon his own humble beginnings as a scribe. In those early days, toiling over clay tablets for a mere pittance, he observed that certain fellow workers were able to carve far more tablets than he could, and as a result, they were paid significantly more. Rather than succumbing to jealousy, Arkad made a fierce internal vow that he would be outworked by no one. He systematically dismantled the reasons for their superior output and applied them to his own labor. He injected a deeper interest into his daily tasks, forced a sharper concentration upon his carvings, and summoned an unrelenting persistence in his physical effort. Soon, he had mastered his craft to such a degree that few men in Babylon could match his daily production. The reward was inevitable and swift. His employer recognized his elevated skill and increased his wages accordingly, entirely without Arkad having to beg for recognition 6 times in 2 months. The fundamental law, Arkad proclaimed, is that the more wisdom a man acquires, the more wealth he is capable of earning. The individual who actively seeks to expand his knowledge of his chosen profession will be richly rewarded. If a man is a craftsman, he must relentlessly study the advanced methods and superior tools utilized by the absolute masters of his trade. If he is a merchant, he must constantly scour the markets for finer goods that can be acquired at better margins. The affairs of humanity are in a state of perpetual evolution, driven by keen, ambitious minds seeking greater skill to better serve their communities. Therefore, Arkad urged every man present to violently reject stagnation and fight to remain at the absolute vanguard of progress, lest he be left behind in the dust of mediocrity. Beyond the mastery of a trade, Arkad detailed a strict code of personal conduct that a man must adhere to if he is to command true self-respect, a vital component of wealth. A man must pay his debts with urgent promptness and absolutely refuse to purchase goods he cannot afford. He must provide for his family with such dedication that they speak of him with deep honor. He must formalize his affairs, creating a recorded will so that if the gods call him unexpectedly, his estate is divided with justice and dignity. Finally, he must cultivate a heart of compassion, extending reasonable aid to those crushed by sudden misfortune, and performing consistent deeds of thoughtfulness for his loved ones. This, Arkad declared, is the 7th and final cure for a lean purse. You must relentlessly cultivate your own internal powers. You must study fiercely, become vastly wiser, master your skills, and conduct your life with unshakable self-respect. By doing so, you will forge the ultimate confidence required to manifest your most carefully considered desires. With his instruction complete, Arkad looked out over the 100 chosen men. He reminded them that the wealth of Babylon was staggering, a boundless ocean of gold far beyond their wildest dreams. There was absolute abundance for every man willing to learn. He issued his final royal mandate. They were to go forth, ruthlessly apply these 7 truths to construct their own fortunes, and then, as commanded by their king, disperse throughout the empire to teach these immutable laws to every honorable citizen willing to listen. Book Clason Part Marba Chapter Study Guide The 7th Cure Increase thy ability to earn. The final cure shifts the intense focus away from the external mechanics of money and directs it squarely onto the internal mechanics of the individual. You are challenged to confront your own untapped potential and identify the specific arenas where your capacity to earn remains dormant. The foundation of this expansion is a highly defined, burning desire. You must measure the intensity of your own ambition on a scale of absolute commitment, determining if your current drive is sufficient to sustain the grueling effort required for financial elevation. Arkad's distinction between a weak general longing for wealth and a sharp, targeted desire for a specific sum is a crucial psychological tool. You must audit your current financial objectives. If your goals are vast, nebulous concepts of prosperity, they must be immediately dismantled and rebuilt into precise, tangible targets that can be systematically attacked and achieved. Furthermore, you must examine your own emotional relationship with the concept of possessing massive wealth. If the idea of commanding large sums of money evokes subconscious discomfort or feels impossibly distant, you must actively explore and dissolve these limiting beliefs. The strategy of breaking grand ambitions into simple, manageable objectives prevents the paralysis of overwhelming complexity. You are tasked with refining your current list of desires, surgically removing any goals that are currently too confusing or vastly beyond your present level of training, focusing instead on the immediate, achievable milestones that will build momentum. Reflecting on Arkad's evolution as a scribe, a brutal assessment of your own professional work ethic is required. You must grade your current levels of interest, concentration, and persistence within your daily labor. Identifying the specific traits that require further development is the first step toward mastery. Beyond mere effort, you must aggressively pursue new knowledge. This involves identifying the true masters within your field and actively seeking their counsel, perhaps through direct mentorship or the formation of dedicated mastermind groups. You must also commit to staying at the absolute forefront of your industry's innovations, establishing a rigorous routine of studying relevant publications and tracking emerging trends. The code of self-respect outlined by Arkad serves as the moral architecture for enduring wealth. You are asked to rate your current conduct across several critical domains: the promptness with which you settle your debts, the quality of care you provide for your family, the preparation of your final will and testament, your capacity for compassion and charitable aid, and your relentless pursuit of wisdom and skill development. Acknowledging deficiencies in any of these areas highlights the necessary internal work required to build the unshakable confidence necessary for massive success. Finally, the mandate to share this wealth of knowledge challenges the inherently competitive nature of modern commerce. If you harbor a latent fear that teaching others the mechanics of prosperity will somehow diminish your own share of the world's wealth, you must actively dismantle this scarcity mindset. True abundance is expansive. You are encouraged to study the lives of historical titans who generated immense wealth by building systems that empowered and employed thousands. As a final action, you must select at least one individual in your life and commit to mentoring them, actively sharing your insights and guiding them toward their own financial independence, noting the profound shift in your own perspective that this generosity creates. The human desire to be touched by the whimsical grace of good fortune is universal, a yearning as potent in the bustling streets of ancient Babylon as it is within the hearts of modern men. The citizens of this magnificent empire did not merely hope for luck. They were keen, analytical thinkers who actively sought to uncover the mechanics of attracting the generous favor of Ashtar, the goddess of good luck. Their pursuit of this knowledge was not relegated to superstitious whispers, but was openly debated in the grand temple of learning. Within this towering structure, a center of intellectual discourse equal in importance to the king's own palace, societal hierarchies dissolved. Here, the lowliest slave could freely dispute the philosophical assertions of a royal prince. It was within this egalitarian sanctuary that Arkad, the wealthiest man in the empire, frequently held court upon a raised platform, engaging with a diverse assembly of men seeking his wisdom. On one such evening, as the setting sun cast a red haze through the desert dust, the debate was initiated by a tall cloth weaver. He confessed that he had recently stumbled upon a purse heavy with gold coins, and harboring a deep desire for this good fortune to continue, he asked the assembly if there were deliberate ways to entice the goddess of luck to visit them consistently. Arkad welcomed the inquiry, noting that some view luck as a mere accident, a random collision of chance, while others believe it is the deliberate reward bestowed by a bounteous goddess upon those who please her. He challenged the gathered men to share their own encounters with sudden fortune. When a young, lavishly robed man suggested that the gaming tables were the natural habitat of luck, Arkad gently dismantled the illusion. He admitted to understanding the innate human thrill of risking a few silver pieces for the dream of a golden windfall, but he exposed the brutal mathematics of the gambler's den. The games, he explained, are meticulously engineered to heavily favor the gamekeeper. The odds are inherently stacked against the player, ensuring a continuous, guaranteed profit for the house while delivering only fleeting, sporadic victories to the desperate gamblers. Arkad challenged the men to name a single, prominent, wealthy citizen of Babylon who had forged his foundational fortune by casting cubes or betting on chariot races. The ensuing uncomfortable silence proved his point. Arkad asserted that the dignified goddess of luck does not frequent arenas where men reliably lose their hard-earned wealth. Instead, she favors the arenas of honest labor and commerce, where persistent effort tips the scales of probability in a man's favor. Steering the conversation toward more profound waters, an elderly merchant proposed a different lens, examining the moments when luck was nearly grasped but tragically lost. He recounted a painful memory from his youth. Newly married and earning a fair wage, he was presented with a magnificent opportunity. A group of ambitious young men were pooling a tenth of their incomes to purchase barren land outside the city, intending to build massive, ox-driven water wheels to irrigate the soil and sell it as fertile farm plots. The merchant's father desperately urged him to seize this chance and begin building an estate, warning him that opportunity is a fleeting visitor. However, the young merchant was seduced by the immediate gratification of luxurious new robes arriving from the east. Unwilling to sacrifice his momentary pleasure, he delayed his decision until the investment pool was closed. The enterprise ultimately yielded staggering profits, and the merchant was left with nothing but beautiful robes and bitter regret. A swarthy desert man, the owner of vast herds, interjected with profound insight. He declared that the absolute greatest stroke of luck any man can experience is the very first moment he transforms himself from a mere laborer into an investor who draws dividends from his gold. He noted that the merchant's true tragedy was failing to take that vital first step. A Syrian stranger in the crowd enthusiastically agreed, boldly labeling the merchant a procrastinator, a man who tells opportunity to wait while he attends to trivial whims, not realizing that opportunity is a haughty guest who swiftly moves on when ignored. To further illustrate this insidious enemy, a middle-aged buyer of livestock shared his own tale of lost fortune. Returning late to Babylon from a fruitless journey, he found the city gates locked for the night. An elderly farmer, desperate to sell a massive flock of sheep so he could rush to the bedside of his dying wife, offered the animals at an unbelievably low price. The buyer, recognizing the immense profit to be made the next morning, eagerly agreed. However, when the farmer asked for a mere 2/3 payment that night so he could depart, the buyer stubbornly refused, arguing it was too dark to accurately count the restless flock. He insisted on waiting until dawn. When the sun rose, the city gates opened to reveal a panicked populace facing an impending siege. Rival buyers rushed out and purchased the farmer's flock for 3 times the original price, leaving the hesitant buyer with empty hands. A venerable saddle maker interpreted the moral of this agonizing loss. He explained that human nature is inherently flawed. We are fiercely stubborn when we are wrong, but tragically prone to vacillation when our judgment is actually correct. When a man's intellect recognizes a genuinely profitable bargain, he must actively defend himself against his own internal weakness and hesitation. The saddle maker revealed his own strategy. The moment his mind recognized a wise investment, he forced himself to place an immediate deposit, binding his own hands to prevent his spirit of procrastination from sabotaging his success. The livestock buyer nodded in solemn agreement, confessing that he had previously blamed his lost profits on poor judgment or a stubborn disposition before finally unmasking his true enemy, the devastating habit of needless delay when decisive action was required. He realized that to claim the rich treasures of Babylon, he had to wage a violent internal war against this paralyzing spirit of procrastination. Arkad, having masterfully guided the discourse, turned back to the cloth-weaver who had initiated the debate. He asked the man what he now believed about the nature of good luck. The weaver, his perspective entirely shifted, realized that enduring luck is not a magical accident that falls upon a passive man. True luck is the direct result of aggressively taking advantage of the opportunities that present themselves. Arkad affirmed this profound revelation, delivering the ultimate lesson of the evening. The tales of wealth won and wealth lost all pointed to a singular, undeniable truth. Good luck can be actively enticed by the swift and decisive acceptance of opportunity. The bounteous goddess is deeply drawn to those who demonstrate a fierce eagerness to improve their station. She is eager to reward those who please her, and above all else, she is pleased by men of action. The ancient proverb of Babylon proposes a profound consideration. If a man is truly favored by luck, there is no limit to his good fortune. One could throw him into the turbulent waters of the Euphrates, and he would likely emerge holding a priceless pearl. This imagery forces a deep introspection into your own relationship with fortune. You must evaluate the presence of luck in your own life, taking a rigorous measure of the times you have felt mysteriously favored by circumstance. Beyond simple chance, the inquiry demands whether you believe there is a deliberate methodology to attract such fortune into your daily existence. In ancient Babylon, seekers of truth gathered in the grand temple of learning. To mirror this pursuit in the modern era, you must identify your own contemporary temples, the resources, books, mentors, and networks you actively engage to expand your understanding of wealth. A critical distinction is drawn between the illusions of the gaming table and the solid ground of honest trade. Arkad firmly believed that the goddess of luck does not frequent the arenas where men reliably lose their gold to the gamekeeper. You are challenged to examine any lingering hopes you might harbor of gaining vast wealth through gambling or sheer chance. A brutal assessment of the true odds and the inevitable losses associated with these pursuits is necessary to banish the fantasy of sudden, unearned riches. Conversely, the focus must shift to honest, persistent commerce, where the laws of probability inherently favor the dedicated worker. The narrative of missed opportunities serves as a haunting reminder of fortune slipping through hesitant fingers. You must actively recall the specific moments in your own life when a highly profitable circumstance was presented, only to be lost through your own delay. Perhaps an investment was sacrificed in favor of purchasing temporary luxuries or needless finery. To truly grasp the cost of such decisions, you are tasked with calculating the exact financial impact of your past frivolities. Estimate the sums wasted on fleeting pleasures, apply the compounding mathematics of time, and confront the staggering fortune those lost coins could have built had they been properly deployed. Ultimately, the great enemy unmasked in this lesson is the paralyzing spirit of procrastination. You must unflinchingly rate your own tendency to delay critical decisions. When opportunity knocks, does fear or stubbornness cause you to hesitate until the door is closed? The ancient livestock buyer learned to combat his own vacillation by forcing an immediate deposit the moment his intellect recognized a wise bargain. You are urged to devise your own unshakable action steps to conquer procrastination. By committing to swift, decisive action, you actively transform yourself into the type of individual the bounteous goddess of luck most fiercely desires to reward. The 5 laws of gold. Beneath a brilliant canopy of desert stars, the rugged camel trader Kalabab sat before a crackling fire of dry shrubs, surrounded by the 27 men who had faithfully guarded his merchandise across the treacherous sands. He posed a profound question to his weary, sun-tanned crew. If forced to choose between a heavy bag of solid gold and a simple clay tablet carved with enduring wisdom, which would they take? Without hesitation, the men chorused their desire for the gold. Kalabab smiled the knowing smile of a man who had witnessed the endless follies of humanity. He pointed into the dark desert where the wild dogs howled in hungry desperation. He noted that if one were to feed those starving beasts, they would instantly fight, gorge themselves, and strut about, giving absolutely no thought to the inevitable hunger of the following day. Mankind, he lamented, is tragically similar. Given the choice, men will eagerly grasp the gold and entirely ignore the wisdom. Yet, without the wisdom, the gold is swiftly squandered, leaving them to wail in poverty once more. Gold, he declared with absolute certainty, is permanently reserved only for those who understand its laws and fiercely abide by them. To reward their loyal service, Kalabab shared a masterful tale he had heard in his youth, the story of Nomasir, the son of Arkad, the richest man in Babylon. It was customary in the empire for wealthy sons to remain comfortably in their father's estates, awaiting their inheritance. Arkad, however, vehemently rejected this breeding of weakness. When Nomasir reached manhood, Arkad commanded him to go out into the unforgiving world for 10 years to prove he possessed the capability to both acquire wealth and command the respect of men. To equip him, Arkad provided 2 vital tools he himself had lacked in his youth: a heavy bag of Babylonian gold and a clay tablet meticulously inscribed with the 5 immutable laws of wealth. A decade later, Nomasir returned. A grand feast was held. and the young man stood before his parents and their esteemed guests to render the final accounting of his journey. Nomosia spoke with deep humility, confessing that his early days had been a disastrous squandering of his father's gift. Eager to multiply his gold in the growing city of Nineveh, he had fallen prey to deceit. He had foolishly joined strangers in a massive wager on a seemingly unbeatable horse, only to discover it was a carefully orchestrated swindle that stripped him of a vast portion of his wealth. Shortly after, driven by desperation, he partnered with another inexperienced youth to purchase a dying merchant's shop, a venture that rapidly collapsed, forcing him to sell the remaining worthless stock for a pittance. Stripped of his gold, his horses, and his slaves, Nomosia plunged into the abyss of poverty. He sold his finest robes merely to secure a meager meal. It was in the crushing grip of this despair that he finally remembered the clay tablet his father had given him. He realized with bitter clarity that he had violently reversed the order of success. He had sought the gold before seeking the wisdom. Nomosia recited the sacred laws etched into the clay. The first law dictated that gold comes gladly and in increasing quantity to any man who sets aside no less than 1/10 of his earnings to forge an estate for his future. The second law revealed that gold labors diligently and contentedly for the wise owner who finds it profitable employment, multiplying like the flocks of the field. The third law warned that gold clings only to the protection of the cautious owner who invests it strictly under the advice of men wise in its handling. The fourth law declared that gold slips away from the man who invests it in unfamiliar businesses or purposes not approved by seasoned experts. And the fifth, final law stated that gold actively flees the man who forces it to impossible earnings, who follows the alluring advice of tricksters, or who trusts his own inexperienced romantic desires in investment. Armed with this profound awakening knowledge, Nomosia secured grueling employment, managing a crew of slaves constructing the new outer walls of the city. He rigorously applied the first law, ruthlessly saving every possible copper until it became silver. Eventually, the slave master, recognizing Nomosia's discipline, offered him an opportunity to pool their resources. The king would soon require massive bronze gates for the newly constructed walls, yet no metal was available in the city. The men pooled their saved gold to dispatch a caravan to the distant copper and tin mines. When the king demanded the gates, they commanded the market and sold their metal for a staggering profit. By strictly adhering to the third law, Nomosia continually reinvested his growing wealth alongside these battle-tested conservative men who refused to risk their principal capital. Over the subsequent years, his fortune compounded magnificently. He had not only recovered his father's gold, but multiplied it vastly. To conclude his tale, Nomosia had a slave bring forward 3 heavy leather bags. He laid the first bag of gold at his father's feet, declaring it an equal repayment for the original bag he had lost. Then, in exchange for the clay tablet of wisdom, he laid down the 2 remaining bags of gold. He proclaimed to the silent, awestruck room that the wisdom was infinitely more valuable than the coin itself. Without the wisdom, the gold was merely a fleeting illusion. With the wisdom, massive wealth could be summoned from absolute nothingness. Kalabab looked deeply into the eyes of his men by the fading fire. He challenged them to consider what they would have to show when they returned to their own fathers. Would they boast of travels and hard labor, yet possess empty pockets? Wealth that arrives in a sudden flash of luck departs just as quickly. Enduring wealth, the kind that brings lifelong power and deep satisfaction, is built gradually. It is the direct offspring of applied knowledge and relentless, unyielding purpose. The laws of gold are eternal, waiting in the shadows to richly reward any man willing to step out of the herd of struggling humanity and claim his rightful mastery over his own financial destiny. The stark choice presented by Kalabab to his desert-weary workers, a heavy bag of gold versus a clay tablet carved with enduring wisdom, serves as a profound mirror for one's own values. When faced with this ancient dilemma, the immediate human instinct is often to grasp the gold. You are challenged to deeply interrogate your own desires and determine which of these 2 treasures you would truly choose, and to articulate the underlying philosophy driving that choice. Kalabab's harsh observation that men will eagerly ignore wisdom only to inevitably waste their gold is a timeless truth. This phenomenon is vividly demonstrated in the modern era by those who acquire sudden, massive wealth, such as lottery winners, only to find themselves entirely destitute shortly thereafter. You must examine this tragic cycle and define the exact psychological and financial mechanisms that cause unprepared individuals to so rapidly destroy their own unearned fortunes. Furthermore, you must define the specific, unyielding laws that Kalabab insists must be understood and obeyed to truly reserve gold for oneself. The narrative shifts to Arkad's unconventional approach to inheritance. Rejecting the tradition of blindly passing wealth to unproven heirs, he demanded that his son, Nomasir, venture into the world to validate his capability. This demands a deeply personal reflection on the nature of legacy. You must consider whether you possess the fortitude to challenge your own offspring or heirs in such a rigorous manner before transferring your life's accumulation. If they were to prove unworthy, you are tasked with determining to whom, or to what noble cause, you would redirect your fortune. Equipped with a bag of gold and the 5 carved laws, Nomasir embarked on his decade-long trial. You must carefully review these 5 distinct laws of wealth. A rigorous self-assessment is required. You must determine which of these ancient edicts you believe holds the greatest supreme power, and conversely, which specific law you have most frequently violated and now need to master. By examining Nomasir's ultimate triumph, achieved only after he aligned himself with the 3rd law and sought the counsel of wise men, you are asked to evaluate your own current investments and determine if they are genuinely generating wealth. Upon his victorious return, Nomasir demonstrated profound humility, attributing his massive success not to his own innate genius, but entirely to the wisdom imparted by his father. This grace of character requires you to look inward and identify the individuals, mentors, or teachings to which you owe your own triumphs. If you find that you attribute your success to no one but yourself, you must carefully examine the roots of that absolute independence. Finally, the philosophy of wealth accumulation is dissected. Kalabab's assertion that wealth acquired quickly is destined to vanish just as rapidly challenges the modern obsession with instant gratification. You must weigh this against your own observations and determine if you have witnessed exceptions to this rule. Conversely, the concept that earning enduring wealth is but a slight, consistent burden upon a thoughtful individual requires you to evaluate your own patience and your personal tolerance for financial risk. Kalabab concluded that the ultimate magic power lies in the strength of one's own desires. You are invited to harness that power by spending deliberate time vividly envisioning yourself commanding massive wealth, fully experiencing the emotional reality of that boundless abundance and allowing that vision to fuel your ongoing journey. Rodan, a master spearmaker of ancient Babylon, found himself possessing an unprecedented sum of wealth. He strode down the king's grand highway, the heavy leather wallet at his belt, swaying and clinking with the sweetest music he had ever known. 50 pieces of solid gold. This magnificent bounty was a direct gift from his sovereign, a reward for designing a superior, devastating new point for the weapons of the royal guard. The sheer power of the coins intoxicated him. They represented the ability to purchase vast lands, magnificent homes, or thriving herds. Yet this sudden influx of wealth brought an unfamiliar, heavy burden of responsibility and relentless solicitation from those eager to share his fortune. Seeking refuge and wisdom, Rodan bypassed the glittering displays of the city's markets and entered the private quarters of Mathon, a highly respected lender of gold and merchant of rare antiquities. Mathon, lounging comfortably as he was served by a slave, greeted the spearmaker with surprise. It was a rare occurrence for a man to seek the gold lender not for coin to fund his follies, but for pure counsel. Recognizing the gravity of Rodan's visit, Mathon welcomed him as an honored guest, ordering fine food and rare vintage wine to ease his friend's troubled mind. Rodan poured out his dilemma. He confessed his inability to fend off the constant pleas for a share of his newly acquired gold, particularly the desperate entreaties of his beloved sister. She begged Rodan to loan the entire sum to her husband, Araman, who harbored dreams of abandoning his current station to become a wealthy merchant. Rodan was deeply devoted to his sister, yet a profound instinct warned him against parting with his hard-earned, glorious treasure. Mathon smiled the weary, knowing smile of a man intimately acquainted with the frailties of human ambition. He explained that sudden wealth inevitably shifts a man's standing among his peers, bringing both the intoxicating power to do good and the terrifying fear of loss. To illustrate the hidden dangers of poorly conceived generosity, Mathon recounted an ancient fable of a farmer who possessed the magical ability to understand the beasts of the field. In this tale, the grueling labor of the ox was contrasted with the leisurely existence of the ass. Hearing the ox bitterly complain of his endless toil beneath the heavy yoke, the sympathetic ass offered a cunning strategy. The ox should feign illness the next morning to secure a day of rest. The ox followed this advice, and the farmer, finding his beast incapacitated, simply commanded the slave to hitch the ass to the plough instead. At the end of a punishing, agonizing day in the fields, the ass realized the bitter cost of his misguided sympathy. He told the ox that he would never again interfere, realizing that in his attempt to help a friend, he had merely taken the crushing burden upon his own back. The moral, Mathon pointed out, was stark and unyielding. If you desire to help your friend, you must do so in a manner that does not transfer his heavy burdens onto your own shoulders. To further illuminate the science of lending, Mathon brought forth his most prized possession, a red pigskin chest bound in bronze. This was his token box. For every loan he issued, Mathon demanded a physical token from the borrower, which remained in the chest until the debt was honorably satisfied. If a loan defaulted, the token remained forever as a grim monument to misplaced trust. Mathon meticulously categorized the varying degrees of risk. The safest, most desirable loans were those secured by tangible assets, lands, valuable herds, or precious jewels that vastly exceeded the value of the borrowed gold. These loans guaranteed the absolute safety of the principal. The next tier of security rested upon the borrower's proven capacity to earn. Men who labored diligently and possessed honorable reputations could reliably generate the income necessary to repay their debts with interest. The most dangerous, foolish loans were those extended to individuals lacking both property and earning power, relying solely on emotion or desperate hope. He drew specific tokens from the chest to narrate the tragic and triumphant realities of his trade. He showed a bronze neckpiece belonging to a cherished friend who had been murdered by a foreign wife he had impoverished himself to please. A stark reminder that men consumed by violent, irrational emotions are disastrous risks for any lender. He produced an oxbone ring from a humble farmer who reliably borrowed to expand his herds, proving that gold loaned for productive, income-generating purposes naturally returns to its master. He scoffed at a beautiful piece of jewelry pledged by an arrogant mother who borrowed to fund her inexperienced son's disastrous merchant venture, illustrating that youth, blinded by romantic desires for rapid wealth, often plunges into a pit of unrecoverable debt. Turning the full weight of his experience upon Rodin's dilemma, Mathon asked a piercing question. What actual knowledge of the merchant trade did Araman possess? Did he know the secret routes to acquire goods at the lowest cost, or the elite networks required to sell them for a substantial profit? Rodin was forced to admit his brother-in-law possessed none of these vital skills. Mathon declared the ambition, while perhaps noble in spirit, to be entirely impractical and devoid of the foundation necessary to secure the gold. The gold lender delivered his final, ironclad verdict. The 50 pieces of gold were the ultimate reward for Rodin's exceptional skill and years of sacrifice. No man possessed the right to demand them, nor was Rodin under any moral obligation to surrender them to fund the unproven fantasies of his sister's husband. Mathon advised Rodin to offer Araman a challenge. If the aspiring merchant could present a thoroughly researched, viable business plan that met the rigorous approval of the gold lender himself, then, and only then, should Rodin risk a small fraction of his savings to test the man's mettle. Mathon reminded the spearmaker that the paramount desire of any newly wealthy man must be the absolute safety of his principal. Only after that safety is guaranteed should he seek to multiply his fortune. He warned against the intoxicating sirens of usurious, impossible returns, urging Rodin to associate exclusively with men of established success and proven financial wisdom. As Rodin departed, forever changed by this profound education, he read the inscription carved fiercely into the lid of Mathon's token chest. A timeless warning for all who command wealth: better a little caution than a great regret. Study Guide: The Gold Lender of Babylon. This section demands a rigorous personal evaluation of the heavy responsibilities and complex emotional dynamics that accompany sudden wealth. When Rodin received his magnificent reward, he was immediately besieged by requests for financial aid. You must examine your own emotional fortitude in the face of such pressure. Reflect upon whether you have ever received a significant sum of money and experienced the intense fear of losing it, or the subtle, manipulative demands of those around you. You are challenged to determine if you possess the absolute willpower to say no to the desperate pleas of friends and family when their requests jeopardize your hard-earned security. Mathon's powerful fable of the ox and the ass serves as a brutal warning against misplaced sympathy. The mandate is clear. You must never attempt to relieve the burdens of a friend, if doing so simply transfers that exact burden onto your own shoulders. A brutal accounting of your past generosity is required. You must document any instances where your desire to financially rescue another individual ultimately dragged you into their cycle of hardship or permanently damaged the relationship. The concept of the token chest introduces the absolute necessity of collateral and proven earning capacity when extending credit. You must evaluate your own standing in these rigorous categories. If you were forced to seek a massive loan today, do you possess the unencumbered physical assets, the lands or the valuable property, to guarantee the principal? Furthermore, you must interrogate your own capacity to earn. Do you command a profession or a specialized skill set that generates a reliable surplus income, rendering you a safe investment for a potential lender? The narrative strictly divides borrowers into those who seek gold for productive, income-generating enterprises and those who borrow to fund their indiscretions or romantic fantasies of rapid wealth. This requires you to conduct a merciless audit of your own borrowing history. Have you ever leveraged your future by utilizing credit to purchase fleeting luxuries, thereby descending into the treacherous pit of consumer debt? If you currently carry such burdens, you must recognize them as the actions of an undisciplined mind and forge an immediate, unyielding plan to eradicate them. Finally, the ultimate law of the gold lender is inscribed upon his chest. Better a little caution than a great regret. You must apply this unforgiving metric to your current investment strategies. Are you being swayed by the fantastic, impossible promises of inexperienced dreamers? Or are you aggressively seeking the counsel of proven, battle-tested financial masters? Your wealth is a testament to your life's labor. You must swear to guard its safety above all other desires, refusing to surrender a single coin without an absolute guarantee of its secure return. Old Banzar, a battle-hardened veteran of campaigns long past, stood resolute at the entrance of the passageway that ascended to the towering ramparts of Babylon. High above him, valiant defenders fought a desperate struggle to hold the walls. Upon their courage rested the very survival of the great metropolis and its hundreds of thousands of souls. The terrifying din of war cascaded over the massive fortifications, the unified roar of attacking legions, the frantic shrieks of dying men, the thunderous trampling of countless war horses, and the rhythmic, earth-shaking boom of heavy, battering rams smashing against the unyielding bronze gates. In the street, immediately behind the gate, a sparse contingent of spearmen waited in grim anticipation, ready to defend the breach should the massive doors give way. They were tragically few for such a monumental task. The Empire's main army was far away in the east, accompanying the king on a massive expedition against the Elamites. No one had anticipated an assault upon the city during their absence, leaving the defending garrison dangerously thin. Suddenly, descending from the north, the fierce and mighty armies of the Assyrians had struck. Now, the walls simply had to hold, or Babylon would be utterly consumed. Crowds of terrified citizens thronged around Banzar, their faces pale and drawn with terror as they desperately sought news of the conflict above. With hushed, fearful reverence, they watched the endless, grim procession of the dead and wounded being carried or assisted down the passageway. This specific gate had become the absolute crux of the battle. After 3 days of probing the city's perimeter, the enemy had suddenly concentrated their massive strength against this single section. The defenders atop the wall fought fiercely to repel the climbing platforms and scaling ladders, raining down arrows, boiling oil, and merciless spear thrusts upon any attacker who managed to reach the parapet. In return, thousands of Assyrian archers unleashed a relentless, deadly barrage of arrows upon the Babylonian defenders. Positioned at the very heart of the chaos, old Banzar held the best vantage point for information. He was the first to learn of every fresh assault and every frantic repulse. An elderly merchant, his hands trembling with palsy, pushed his way to the front of the crowd. He pleaded for news, terrified that the enemy would breach the gates. His sons were away with the king, leaving him no one to protect his aged wife or his hard-earned goods. He feared they would be stripped of their food, left to starve or slaughtered as they were too old to be of use as slaves. Banzar met the old man's panic with the calm, unshakable authority of a seasoned soldier. He commanded the merchant to calm himself, assuring him that the walls of Babylon were impenetrable. He instructed the man to return to the bazaar and comfort his wife, promising that the great walls would guard their humble possessions just as fiercely as they guarded the king's deepest treasuries. As the merchant retreated, a young woman clutching an infant took his place. She begged the sergeant for news from the parapets to comfort her fiercely wounded husband. Despite suffering from terrible fever and devastating injuries, her husband had insisted upon taking up his armor and spear to protect her and the unborn child she carried, terrified of the vengeful brutality the enemy would unleash if they entered the city. Banzar gentled his voice for the expectant mother, assuring her that the towering, unyielding walls would completely protect her and her children. He told her to listen to the triumphant shouts of the defenders as they poured boiling oil upon the scaling ladders, and to tell her husband that the gates would easily withstand the battering rams. He urged her to return to her home and seek the safety of the buildings. Banzar stepped aside to allow a column of heavily armed reinforcements to march up the bloody passageway. As the soldiers tramped past with the heavy clank of bronze shields, a small girl tugged desperately at Banzar's belt. She was terrified by the awful noises and the sight of bleeding men, pleading to know what would become of her mother, her little brother, and the baby. The grim warrior blinked away the harshness of the battle and leaned down to the child. He spoke with absolute conviction, telling her not to fear. He explained that the great Queen Semiramis had built these magnificent walls over a century ago precisely to protect children like her. In all that time, the walls had never been broken. He sent her back to her family with the absolute promise of safety. For 3 weeks and 5 agonizing days, the siege raged with terrifying, unceasing violence. Banzar's jaw set harder and grimmer with each passing day, as the passageway behind him turned into a slick, gruesome mire of mud and blood from the endless stream of men marching up to fight and staggering down wounded or dead. Outside, the slaughtered Assyrians piled into massive heaps before the walls, gathered and buried by their comrades under the cover of darkness. Finally, on the 5th night of the 4th week, the deafening clamor outside the walls began to diminish. As the first light of dawn broke across the plains, it illuminated massive swirling clouds of dust raised by the retreating Assyrian army. A singular, mighty shout of triumph erupted from the exhausted defenders upon the walls. It was immediately echoed by the waiting reserves below, and the triumphant roar swept through the city streets with the explosive violence of a sudden storm. The pent-up terror of the past month shattered, releasing a wild, pulsing chorus of absolute joy. From the highest pinnacle of the Temple of Bel, the eternal flames flared brightly into the sky, sending a towering column of blue smoke to broadcast the victory far and wide. The magnificent walls of Babylon had once again broken a mighty, vicious enemy intent on looting its treasures and enslaving its people. Babylon endured through the centuries for one fundamental reason. It was fully, unbreakably protected. The walls of Babylon stand as a supreme historical monument to mankind's fundamental need and deepest desire for absolute protection. This primal instinct remains as powerful today as it was millennia ago, though modern humanity has engineered broader, more sophisticated fortresses. Today, we construct our impenetrable walls not of burnt brick, but of robust insurance policies, unshakable savings accounts, and deeply dependable investments. These modern ramparts guard us against the sudden, devastating tragedies that can strike any home without warning. The ultimate lesson of the Great Siege remains eternally true. No individual and no family can ever afford to exist without the fortress of adequate protection. The dramatic historical account of Babylon's impenetrable walls shielding its citizens from complete annihilation serves as a powerful metaphor for personal security. Banzar, the steadfast guard, provided absolute reassurance to the terrified inhabitants that they were safe within the city's massive fortifications. This requires a profound and immediate evaluation of your own sense of security. You must honestly measure the degree of safety you currently feel within your own life, assessing whether you operate from a foundation of peace or a foundation of anxiety. The primal desire for protection is an inherent aspect of the human condition. To master your financial and emotional security, you must first clearly define the threats. You are challenged to conduct a fearless inventory of the specific forces, events, or potential tragedies from which you desperately feel you need protection. Once these fears are brought into the light and catalogued, a deeper psychological analysis is required. You must determine if these anxieties are heavily impeding your progress, paralyzing your decision-making, or quietly draining your vital energy. The narrative directly translates the ancient physical walls into the modern financial fortresses required for survival. The first of these contemporary walls is insurance. You must rigorously audit your current insurance portfolio. Determine if you have actively invested in the policies necessary to completely shield your family, your health, and your assets from catastrophic loss. If you find your coverage lacking, you must calculate exactly how much additional insurance is required to forge a truly unshakable sense of safety. The second impregnable wall is the establishment of robust savings accounts. You must examine your current cash reserves and determine if they are merely stagnant pools or if they are actively generating significant interest. If your savings are not commanding a worthy return, the mandate is clear. You must aggressively investigate and secure safer, more profitable avenues for your liquid assets to ensure they are compounding efficiently. The final pillar of modern protection is the cultivation of dependable investments. While the absolute certainty of any investment is an illusion, you must evaluate the overall integrity and safety of your current portfolio. If you harbor deep unease regarding any specific financial commitment, you must articulate the exact nature of that insecurity. Once identified, you are tasked with defining the precise, strategic actions required to mitigate that risk and restore your confidence in the investment. The ultimate unyielding conclusion of this lesson is that no individual can afford to exist without a fortress of adequate protection. You must brutally survey the entirety of your life, financial, physical, and professional, to identify any exposed flanks where you remain completely vulnerable. Upon discovering these unprotected areas, you must commit to relentless research and immediate action, constructing the necessary defenses to ensure your own enduring survival and prosperity. Hunger possesses a cruel sharpening effect. It brings a painful clarity to the mind while simultaneously heightening every sense to the agonizing aromas of nearby food. Arkad, the son of Azur, was currently suffering this exact miserable clarity. For 2 agonizing days, his only sustenance had been a pair of tiny figs snatched desperately from a walled garden before a screaming woman chased him into the streets. Her shrill curses still echoed in his ears as he wandered through the bustling market of Babylon, serving as the only deterrent preventing his trembling hands from seizing the magnificent fragrant fruits overflowing the merchants' baskets. He had never truly appreciated the sheer, overwhelming volume of food available in the city until he was entirely deprived of it. Driven by gnawing emptiness, Arkad crossed the market and began to pace anxiously before the local eating house. He harbored a desperate, lingering hope of encountering a familiar face, someone from whom he might beg a single copper coin. A copper was the bare minimum required to secure a welcoming smile from the gruff innkeeper and a liberal serving of food. Without it, he knew he would be instantly and violently rejected. Lost in his miserable abstraction, Arkad suddenly found himself directly confronting the one individual in all of Babylon he most desperately wished to avoid: Dabasir, the tall, angular, and notoriously blunt camel trader. Among the many friends and acquaintances Arkad had manipulated for small loans, Dabasir made him the most intensely uncomfortable, largely because Arkad had completely failed to honor his repeated promises of prompt repayment. Dabasir's face instantly brightened with predatory recognition. He loudly declared his good fortune at finding Arkad, demanding immediate repayment of the 2 coppers loaned a month prior, as well as the piece of silver borrowed even earlier. He aggressively insisted he had urgent need of the coins that very day. Arkad's face burned with a deep, humiliated flush. With an entirely empty stomach, he possessed absolutely no fortitude to argue with the forceful camel trader. He offered a weak, stuttering apology, confessing that he possessed neither the copper nor the silver to settle the debt. Dabasir was entirely unsympathetic, demanding that Arkad simply go and get the money to repay an old friend of his father who had aided him in his hour of need. When Arkad miserably attempted to blame his inability to pay on a relentless streak of ill fortune, Dabasir scoffed with brutal disdain. He declared that ill fortune naturally stalks every man who prioritizes borrowing over the honorable act of repaying. Rather than striking the boy, Dabasir surprisingly commanded Arkad to accompany him into the eating house, promising to feed the starving youth while delivering a necessary tale. Arkad inwardly cringed at Dabasir's savage frankness, but the overwhelming lure of food forced him through the coveted doorway. Dabasir dragged him to a small rug in a far corner and aggressively ordered a massive, juicy leg of goat bread and abundant vegetables for himself. For his starving companion, Dabasir sadistically ordered only a jug of cooled water. Arkad's heart plummeted. He was condemned to sit in agonizing silence, drinking plain water while watching the camel trader systematically devour an entire roasted goat leg. Dabasir, oblivious to silence, cheerfully engaged the surrounding diners, announcing he had heard a strange rumor of a man in Urfa who possessed a thinly cut yellow stone. When one looked through this stone, the entire world appeared unnatural and a completely different color. He challenged Arkad, asking if he believed the world could genuinely appear to a man in a color completely different from its reality. Arkad, his eyes locked desperately on the dripping meat, muttered a weak agreement. Dabasir seized upon this, declaring he knew it to be an absolute truth, for he himself had once viewed the entire world through the distorted lens of a colored stone, and his impending tale would reveal how he finally managed to see the world in its true, unforgiving light once more. The promise of a story from the legendary camel trader drew the attention of the surrounding diners, who dragged their rugs closer, crunching loudly on their food and bumping the starving Arkad with their greasy bones. Dabasir paused his vicious assault on the meat to reveal a shocking truth. Before he was the master camel trader of Babylon, he had been a miserable slave in the hostile lands of Syria. A ripple of genuine astonishment ran through the gathered crowd. Dabasir explained that as a young, inexperienced man, he had learned the trade of saddle-making from his father and taken a wife. Earning only a modest wage, he found himself craving luxuries entirely beyond his means. He quickly discovered that shopkeepers were eager to extend credit, allowing him to acquire fine garments and extravagant furnishings without immediate payment. Ignorant of the brutal laws of finance, Dabasir did not realize that a man who consistently spends more than he earns is actively sowing the violent winds of self-indulgence, virtually guaranteeing a future harvest of humiliation and disaster. Inevitably, his earnings could no longer cover both his daily survival and his compounding debts. Creditors began to hound him relentlessly. He borrowed further from friends to appease the merchants, destroying those relationships as well. As his life devolved into a miserable nightmare of evasion, his wife abandoned him, returning to her father's house. Desperate and ruined, Dabasir fled Babylon, hoping to find easier fortune in a distant city. His flight led to 2 years of aimless wandering and menial labor for caravan traders, eventually culminating in his joining a band of desert robbers who preyed upon unarmed merchant trains. He justified this degradation because his perception was entirely warped by the colored stone of his own irresponsibility. After a successful initial raid, the thieves were ambushed during their second attempt by fiercely armed native spearmen. The leaders were slaughtered, and Dabasir, stripped of his clothing and his dignity, was dragged to Damascus and sold into absolute slavery for a mere 2 pieces of silver. Purchased by a fierce Syrian desert chief, Dabasir was horrified to learn he was to be presented to the chief's 4 wives to serve as a eunuch. Standing naked and terrified before the women, he awaited his mutilation. The eldest wife, Sira, regarded him with cold practicality. Noting a shortage of competent camel tenders, she interrogated Dabasir about his knowledge of the beasts. Desperate to save himself, Dabasir eagerly detailed his ability to load, lead, and manage camels on grueling journeys. Sira claimed him as her personal camel tender. That very day, Dabasir led Sira's camel on a long journey to visit her ailing mother. During the trek, he attempted to salvage some pride, informing his mistress that he was not born a slave, but was the son of an honorable freeman of Babylon. Sira's response was a devastating psychological blow. She coldly demanded how he could possibly consider himself a free man when his own profound weakness had delivered him directly into chains. She posited a brutal truth. If a man possesses the internal soul of a slave, he will inevitably become one, regardless of his birth, just as water relentlessly seeks its lowest level. Conversely, if a man possesses the true soul of a free man, he will fight to become respected and honored, regardless of the tragedies that befall him. For over a year, Dabasir existed in the humiliating purgatory of slavery. He refused to mingle with the other slaves, isolating himself in profound psychological torment over Sira's words. When Sira eventually questioned his isolation, he confessed he was wrestling with the terrifying possibility that he truly harbored the soul of a slave. Sira revealed her own isolation. Despite her wealth, she was unloved by her husband and barren, essentially a slave to the rigid conventions of her tribe. She sharply tested Dabasir's resolve, asking if he harbored a genuine desire to repay the massive debts he had cowardly abandoned in Babylon. When he admitted he desired it but saw no possible mechanism for repayment while enslaved, Sira attacked him relentlessly. She branded him a weakling and a coward, declaring that a man who contentedly allows time to pass without actively fighting to clear his honor is the ultimate embodiment of a slave. She defined his debts as his true enemies, enemies he had fled rather than fought. Had he stood his ground and battled them like a man, he would have retained his honor. Because he fled, his pride was broken, and he was reduced to property. 3 days later, Sira's mother fell deathly ill again. Sira commanded Dabasir to pack the 2 finest camels in the herd with massive provisions for a long journey. Upon reaching her mother's estate under the cover of darkness, Sira dismissed her maid and offered Dabasir the ultimate test of his character. She instructed him to take the heavily provisioned camels and flee into the desert, offering him his master's robes as a disguise. She promised to claim he had stolen the beasts while she was distracted by her dying mother. Overwhelmed by her dangerous generosity, Dabasir thanked her, but Sira merely commanded him to go and prove he possessed the soul of a free man, warning him that the desert crossing would be brutal and unforgiving. Dabasir plunged into the terrifying darkness of the unknown desert. Driven by the primal terror of the horrific tortures inflicted upon recaptured slaves, he rode and led the beasts relentlessly for 2 days before entering a desolate, jagged wasteland of rock and sand entirely devoid of food or water. For 9 agonizing days they pushed through this hellscape. The camels' hooves were battered and bleeding, and the heat was an unyielding, murderous physical weight. At the end of his endurance, Dabasir collapsed from his mount, entirely convinced he was going to die in that forgotten wasteland. When he awoke the next morning, a profound transformation had occurred. The agonizing physical torment of his parched throat and bleeding lips had faded into irrelevance. Staring at the desolate horizon, the ultimate question echoed in his mind. Did he possess the soul of a slave or the soul of a free man? He realized with absolute crystalline certainty that if he possessed a slave's soul, he would simply surrender to the sand and die, a perfectly fitting, pathetic end for a runaway coward. But if he possessed the soul of a free man, he would force himself back to Babylon. He would confront every single man he had wronged, repair the devastation he had caused his wife, and restore honor to his parents' name. In that singular, defining moment, the colored stone of his own self-pity and delusion shattered completely. He finally saw the world in its true, blinding reality. His debts were not insurmountable curses. They were simply enemies to be methodically conquered. And the men who had loaned him the gold were not his tormentors. They were his truest friends, the only ones who had ever genuinely believed in him. Empowered by the surging, undeniable spirit of a free man, Dabasir staggered to his feet. Hunger and thirst were suddenly reduced to minor obstacles on the grand road to redemption. His newly found, ferocious determination seemed to transmit directly into his dying camels. With agonizing effort, the beasts rose, and together they marched blindly northward. Their sheer will was rewarded. They eventually found water and fertile land, navigating back to Babylon because, as Dabasir proclaimed, the soul of a free man views life as a series of problems to be aggressively solved, while the soul of a slave merely whines about his victimhood. Dabasir suddenly turned the full weight of his story upon the starving Arkad, demanding to know if the youth's empty stomach had finally cleared his mind. He challenged Arkad to declare whether he was ready to strip away his own colored stone, abandon the pathetic life of a beggar, and fight to become an honorable man once more. Arkad, moved to tears by the raw power of the tale, eagerly agreed, swearing he finally felt the soul of a free man rising within his chest. Dabasir concluded his tale by detailing his triumphant return to Babylon. Driven by absolute determination, he sought out every creditor, begging for patience while he secured employment. Mathon, the gold lender, recognizing Dabasir's specialized knowledge of Syrian camels, recommended him to the king's chief camel buyer. Through grueling, relentless labor and an unyielding commitment to his repayment plan, Dabasir systematically eliminated every copper of his debt, finally earning the right to walk the streets of Babylon with his head held high. With his story complete, Dabasir roared at the innkeeper, demanding fresh, massive portions of roasted meat for himself, and crucially, an equally massive portion to finally feed his starving, newly awakened friend, Arkad. Dabasir had discovered the ultimate enduring truth that has liberated men from the depths of despair throughout all of human history. Where the determination is, the way can be found. In the autumn of the year 1934, Professor Alfred H. Shrewsbury of the Department of Archaeology at Nottingham University penned a fascinating correspondence to his colleague, Professor Franklin Caldwell, who was stationed with a British scientific expedition amidst the ancient ruins of Mesopotamia. Shrewsbury confirmed the safe arrival of 5 recently excavated clay tablets. Far from detailing grand romantic adventures or sweeping royal histories of the ancient world, the professor was deeply astonished to discover that the meticulous inscriptions chronicled the mundane but intensely relatable financial struggles of an ancient camel trader named Dabasir. The ancient man had carved a precise, methodical plan to eradicate his crippling debts and forge a life of enduring prosperity. The modern professor confessed a profound irony. Despite his advanced academic pedigree, he found himself utterly plagued by the exact same financial distresses that had haunted Dabasir 5 millennia ago. Intrigued by the enduring relevance of this ancient wisdom, Shrewsbury and his wife resolved to apply the trader's plan to their own chaotic finances, promising to report the results of their grand experiment to his colleague. Tablet number I. Under the glow of a full moon, Dabasir, having recently escaped the brutal chains of Syrian slavery, initiated his written record. Driven by an unshakable determination to settle his numerous heavy debts and resurrect his honor within the great city of Babylon, he committed his intentions to the enduring clay. Following the masterful counsel of his friend Mathon, the gold lender, Dabasir forged a rigid mathematical architecture for his future prosperity. The first foundational pillar of his strategy mandated that exactly 1/10 of all his acquired earnings would be permanently sequestered as his own inviolable wealth. Mathon had rightly taught that a man who commands a surplus of silver and gold possesses a loyal heart and is an asset to his family and his kingdom, whereas a man with empty pockets harbors a bitter soul. The second pillar of Dabasir's grand design dictated that exactly 7/10 of his income would be strictly allocated to the maintenance of his household. It was his deepest desire to properly feed, clothe, and support his devoted wife, who had loyally returned to him from her father's estate. However, the absolute success of this entire endeavor hinged upon the iron discipline to never, under any circumstance, allow their living expenses to breach this 70% boundary. Tablet number 2. The third and final pillar of Dabasir's restoration plan was dedicated exclusively to the vanquishing of his enemies, his debts. He decreed that every time the moon reached its zenith, the remaining 2/10 of his total earnings would be meticulously and fairly distributed among the men who had previously placed their trust in him. By consistently carving away at the principle, he knew his ultimate liberation was a mathematical certainty. To bind himself to this honorable course, Dabasir etched the names of his creditors into the clay, permanently recording the exact sums owed to each. He listed Fahru the clothweaver, Sinjar the couchmaker, his friends Ahmar, Zankar, and Askamir, alongside Harinsir the jewel-maker, his father's old companion Diabeka, his landlord Alkahad, the gold lender Mathon, and the farmer Birajik. Tablet number 3. A devastating total emerged from Dabasir's reckoning. He owed an agonizing 119 pieces of silver and 141 pieces of copper. It was the crushing weight of this exact sum that had originally driven him to the cowardly folly of abandoning his wife and his city, seeking effortless wealth abroad, only to find himself chained and sold in a foreign slave market. Empowered by a new, honorable consciousness, Dabasir visited every single man upon his ledger. He offered no excuses, plainly stating that his only asset was his capacity to labor. He presented his unyielding plan to dedicate 20% of his ongoing income to the equitable reduction of their claims. The reactions were deeply varied. His former closest friend, Ahmar, lashed out with bitter insults, leaving Dabasir shrouded in humiliation. Birajik begged for preferential treatment due to his own hardships, while the landlord Alka had threatened severe legal retaliation. Yet, the vast majority of his creditors accepted the proposal with grace. Dabasir departed these encounters armed with a fierce new resolve, realizing that confronting one's obligations head-on is infinitely easier than attempting to outrun them. Tablet number 4. As subsequent moons waxed and waned, Dabasir painstakingly documented his arduous journey. His diligent labor as a buyer of sound camels yielded a modest 19 pieces of silver during the first month. Adhering strictly to his newly established law, he extracted his 10% for saving, divided the 7 parts for his household, and distributed the remaining 20% among his creditors. While the angry Alkahad demanded faster repayment, Dabasir firmly countered that a well-fed, unharassed worker is far more capable of generating wealth than a starved and frightened one. The slow, relentless mathematics of the plan began to bear fruit. By the end of the first month, his debt was reduced, and for the first time, he possessed silver that no man could claim. In the following month, A meager income of 11 pieces of silver tested his resolve, forcing him and his wife to subsist on simple herbs. Yet they did not deviate from the formula. The third recorded month brought a surge of success, 42 pieces of silver earned from a magnificent herd of camels. This windfall allowed for the purchase of much-needed sandals, warm clothing, and a feast of roasted fowl, while simultaneously delivering a massive payment to his lenders. With a purse now heavy with 21 pieces of his own silver, Dabasir walked the streets of Babylon with his head held high, marveling at the profound power of a plan capable of transforming a disgraced slave into a respected citizen. Tablet number V. 12. Full moons completed their cycle before Dabasir returned to the clay to carve his final victorious entry. It was a day of magnificent celebration and feasting within his home, for the last copper of his suffocating debt had been entirely extinguished. His final tour of his creditors was a triumphant procession. Ammar, the friend who had previously reviled him, tearfully begged for his forgiveness and the restoration of their brotherhood. Even the harsh landlord Alka had marveled at Dabasir's transformation, comparing him to a once soft lump of clay that had been forged into a sharp, unyielding blade of bronze, offering to lend him massive sums should he ever require them. Dabasir noted the profound shift in his wife's eyes, a radiant look of absolute confidence in her husband. The great plan had resurrected his life, proving that if a methodical, disciplined system could elevate a desperate slave into a man of means, it possessed the enduring power to grant financial independence to any mortal willing to apply it. 2 years after his initial correspondence, Professor Shrewsbury dispatched a second triumphant letter to the Mesopotamian expedition. He implored his colleague to whisper a word of profound gratitude into the desert winds for the ghost of the old camel trader. The professor revealed the agonizing truth of his own previous existence, a life tormented by unpaid accounts, the terror of academic scandal, and the suffocating trap of predatory credit. By adopting Dabasir's ancient Babylonian blueprint, the Shrewsburys had orchestrated a miraculous financial resurrection. They bravely confronted their modern creditors, establishing a strict 20% repayment plan while demanding cash-only terms for future purchases. They ruthlessly pruned their expenses to survive on 70% of their income, discovering unexpected joy in the challenge of economizing. Most importantly, they experienced the intoxicating thrill of preserving the final 10%. The money they initially jingled in their pockets was eventually channeled into a highly secure compounding investment, guaranteeing their future comfort. The professor concluded with a profound reverence for the ancient wisdom, confirming that the laws of wealth discovered 5,000 years ago remained absolute, immutable, and intensely powerful. Book / Part 5. Chapter. Study Guide. The Clay Tablets from Babylon. The epistolary exchange, spanning 5 millennia, demands a profound reflection on the timelessness of fundamental laws. The reader is challenged to identify other universal truths that have governed their existence with the same unyielding permanence. Dabasir's initial step out of the darkness of debt was the forging of a solemn written commitment upon the clay. The modern student of wealth must recognize the immense psychological weight of transmuting invisible intentions into tangible words. You are tasked with creating your own formal, written declaration of financial responsibility, binding yourself to a definitive course of action.